Welcome to the broadcast. I'm Sidney Winston. I'm a strong atheist, conservative, secular Zionist, but above all, I think I would say I'm a humanist. In this broadcast, I want to do a reaction to Rabbi Simon Jacobson's a lecture that he recorded or broadcast. Remember, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. In the traditional format of all lectures, in this or by this Abrahamic cult that they call Judaism. This man dishonestly and with a flair for running off at the mouth, with a flair for knowing little bits of everything, he delivers in 90 minutes an appeal to atheists to accept God, that there's no other choice but to accept God. This is what I got out of it, and I want you to let me know what you get out of it, if not the same thing. So prepare for many interruptions at this point. If somebody else joins, then we can actually make a show out of it. But in the meantime, actually, I should put up in the. Let me pin the link to the top of the chat, and we're good to go. So let's give it a good old start here. So, firstly, this man is not concerned with Jesus being a myth. This man is more concerned in, at least he would be more concerned if we could show him that Moses is a myth, like that. Moses is a myth. But we probably won't get there today. Simon's talk is one where he tries to reach out to atheists to show them that they cannot rule out God, basically. Absolute nonsense will ensue. I'll try and point out as much as I can. This man is biased towards his presupposition that God has to exist, that God is not created. He comes up with a really flimsy explanation of his whole worldview. So I want to make one more quick change, and then I'll be ready to jump into it. All right. Let's take it away.
Are atheists closer to the truth than believers? That's the topic. Yes.
Are atheists closer to the truth than believers? That's the topic. Firstly, I have a problem with that. The only thing that is true is that God does not exist. Is that a supernatural is just an imaginary realm that we made up as mankind. That's it. That's the end of the lecture. But this man will drag it on for 90 minutes.
Now, so I hope everybody here can take a little irreverent conversation about God, but I believe that having a candid and frank discussion on these matters is far better than just avoiding the discussion of this three-letter word.
This guy makes a lot of assumptions, a lot of claims that are unjustifiable, are incredible, and are just plain stupid.
Called God, G-O-D, is fraught with more opinions, disagreements, arguments. Wars have been fought.
Listen to this.
Misconceptions than any other word in our vocabulary. There are passionate believers and there are passionate non-believers.
Okay, that's a claim. A passionate believer, we understand what a passionate believer is. A crazy man. A person that lives a life of an illusion, in order to pacify his imaginary God, in order to please the people around him who have indoctrinated him to live this suppressive lifestyle. This is what he's supporting, this man. I also want to point out right now that this man is a supporter of ritual genital mutilation, which is customarily, traditionally, and without question has been performed on innocent, defenseless, 8-day-old babies, where the rabbis are handed over the baby by the mother. This is the mother of the child knowingly hands over a baby to somebody like this in order to have his genitals mutilated. Why? Ritual. That's it. And this is what is allowed in society today. It's disgusting.
There are people who are ready to die for and kill others in the name of God.
Okay, he says there's people that are ready to die for and kill others in the name of God. Now listen to this.
And there are other people ready aggressively to attack anyone in the name of no God.
Who said where? Aggressively, there are others. So on the one hand, on the theist side, there are people passionate enough to kill for their God. On the other side, he claims that there are atheists who are passionately ready to kill for no God. What does that mean? Where's that? Even when he said it, he kind of looked a little bit, with his eyes going like this and this around the room. Who's going to believe that?
So when you have such diversity, really you have to get back to the question is there really a disagreement? And perhaps the first thing to do is define what do we mean by God?
It doesn't matter how you define what you mean by God, because there isn't only one definition. There's your definition, there's the Christian's definition, there's the Muslim's definition, there's the Buddhist definition, there's the Sikh definition, and I can go on and on and on and on and on. I haven't even reached Scandinavia yet. So definitions are subjective, purely subjective. And here he's going to give one. Try and give one.
Because if we have different definitions, we clearly are never going to come to terms.
Right. But we can never have one definition. because it has never ever worked out that there has been, at least in the last 2,000 years, we've never actually agreed on one definition. When I say we, I mean the community of Christians, the community of Jews, the community of Muslims, the community of everybody hasn't together, united, agreed on one definition. One definition. So now this man, Simon, is going to try and solve that, I think. Well, he's going to try.
Whether we believe or not believe in something without first defining the axiomatic definition of what the meaning of God is.
Axiomatic, okay.
Now, Yitzhak Badishever put it really powerfully when he said to a self-proclaimed...
You notice that as soon as he goes to provide a definition of God, he goes to some Yechivajisha, or he comes up with some Yiddish traditional nonsense. Without him having to, he's got to go to somewhere else to come up with a story to maybe soften the fact that he's not able to make a point, a logical point. That's what I think.
The atheist, who said to him, "The God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in."
Oh yeah, okay. So the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in. Now that already is dishonest, because there's no existent God that I don't believe in. God does not exist. That's the atheist in me. Okay? What you're doing, Simon, is you're presupposing God in both situations. You're presupposing God exists, but one person believes in that God, and God exists, and the other person doesn't believe in that God. This is what you're doing. You're dishonest. You're just being dishonest.
Which essentially means that first you have to define what God means. Now, every human being on earth fits somewhere on the spectrum. As I said, there is between the extremes of radical believers and radical atheists.
There we go. Radical atheist. So what does he mean by radical atheist? Am I a radical atheist? I know that God does not exist. I claim that God does not exist. And I challenge you to prove me wrong, which you can't. But does that make me a radical atheist? I'm a 7 on the Dawkins scale. I know 100% that God does not exist, cannot exist. God is impossible. Does that make me radical? See, he's already planting seeds of hostility against atheists. This guy's not a nice man.
You have moderate atheists, I've come to learn.
No, he's lying. You got moderate atheists, medium atheists. I've come to learn. You got to give examples when you say I've come to learn, because when you say I've come to learn, no one's going to believe you. I mean, your title actually says, "Don't believe a word I say." Rabbi. Because I preach nonsense. I teach nonsense. I lie. I'm a rabbi. That's how it works.
You have radical and moderate agnostics. You have moderate believers, and everyone fits in somewhere there. But as I'll suggest,
radical or moderate agnostics. He just said that. I can't get my mind to understand what he means by radical atheists and radical agnostics. He's not going to call out radical Jew or radical Christian or radical theist or radical. He only gives the qualifier radical to, or the adjective radical to, the atheists. That's it. This guy is a fake. He's a phony. But I don't know how much we're going to take. This is 90 minutes. You let me know how much we can take of this.
Just here, I think that many of the ideas around God and all the implications of God are really filled with many prejudices and just locked in positions without really thinking about what we're saying or what we're believing. Because take, for example, this phenomenon. People who say, I absolutely believe in God, and yet they behave in a way that's antithetical to God.
Okay, that right there, nonsense. Because you haven't defined what God is and how you can behave antithetical to God. You certainly can't behave like God because God is supernatural, right? So you can't behave as if you're not part of the natural. So to behave antithetical to God is to behave as if you exist. God does not exist, so to behave antithetical to God is to behave as if you exist, which you can prove that you exist. So this nonsense has been spewed for years and years and years, and it's time to stop. It's time to intervene. It's time to stand up and say, you're talking shit, Rabbi Simon.
And then you have someone else who can say, I don't believe in God, and they behave in a far more noble and ethical way than the so-called believer does.
There you go. Look at those eyes. Stupid. He's shifty. That's what I'm calling shifty eyes. He says somebody who doesn't believe in God can behave in a noble and ethical way. Why then does this man need God? Or does anybody need God? If one person without God can behave in an ethical way, in a noble way, in an altruistic way, then if that one person doesn't need God, then nobody needs God in order to behave in an honest, ethical way that promotes harmony amongst community. You don't need anything for that other than yourself to exist, and yourself to be rational, and yourself to use your common sense, and to understand that your actions have consequences, so you take responsibility for your actions. That's it. You don't need God. You just need common sense. Seichel.
So what do these words mean? Just because somebody says they believe, but if their actions are not consistent with what they believe, and someone else says, I don't believe, and their actions are very fine, very refined, like a godly person, so then what do these words mean anyway? Is it just like slogans? You know, some people belong to this club and that club. Maybe it should be measured by actions. And if measured by actions, I would think that there are very few believers that really can say that 24/7 they live their lives as if God is right near them.
There you go. Direct denial and admission, a direct admission that God does not exist. By Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Right there. He just said there are a lot of people believe in God but live a life that's ungodly. Now you're going to find out what an ungodly life is pretty soon. Listen to this. I think, well, maybe he'll get to it. I'll get to it in a bit.
And every action and every word that comes out of their mouth and every thought they have is guided by that principle. Every
thought they have. Why are thoughts restricted in your life, in your lifestyle, Rabbi Simon Jacobson? There's nothing wrong with having thoughts. There's no limit to the thought. There's no restriction on thoughts that your mind can have within your own mind. You can have with yourself. There's no limit. What are you restricting thoughts for? What's the matter with you? But we'll find out soon exactly where he's going. Watch this.
I challenge anyone to find a person like that. So to say that one believes in God and say one does not believe, does that have any significance? Does that have any meaning? Now let's take this a little further.
Well, hold on. Answer the question. I'm saying, okay, if you're asking me the question, it has no meaning. God has no meaning. Absolutely zero. God does not exist. Everybody's an individual, Rabbi. And everybody gets guided by their peers and their seniors to enter adult society with an understanding of right and wrong, of when it's with a mindset that is non-violent and that is purposed to oneself. And that does not mean, without God, that, and I can never understand why, this man is going to do it. Without God, this man is going to say that sexual perversions, you might get involved in sexual perversions. This is where he's going. Just like the Christians, just like the Muslims, this man is no different. There's a bit of fear mongering within his delivery.
A little more philosophical even. Say God exists, one has to really define what does the word exists mean.
Okay, I just want to say that philosophy has got absolutely nothing to do with God. Zero, zip. God doesn't exist. Done. It's not a philosophical conclusion. It's a deduction. It's an axiom. God does not exist is an axiom. Let's humor Sidney Winston and accept the axiom that God does not exist, and then put it to the test. But that's for later. Right now, this man, his axiom is God does exist. No question. That's where he starts. That's why a man like that and me could never really have a discussion, because we have no common ground. I cannot ever accept the fiction, the fantasy of a outside of this nature creator nonsense. I mean, how could anybody know? Number one, it's impossible for there to be anything outside of the natural world, the cosmos, that can communicate with anything in the cosmos. That's all made up. You can tell.
What does the word exist mean? For example, if you said, does love exist? Someone will say, well, based on empirical...
Yeah, he goes on and on and on and on about the existence of love and how you can see it and touch it and feel it, la 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 la. So this is how he starts to plant this little seed of doubt. Because if you don't believe in God, and you know God doesn't exist, this is where he goes. He starts to plant these little abstractions.
Evidence of the five senses, you can't prove that love exists. Just like you can't see subatomic particles. So the word exists is also a very deceptive word. You know, for one person something exists, for another person on a different level it doesn't exist. You know, we see physical objects in this world. We could see with our eyes, we hear sounds, we taste, touch, and smell. But none of those five senses can capture what a molecule or an atom or a subatomic particle looks like. So then you have to define.
So what? So fucking what? No one can listen, this is where he's going to go through this whole lecture. No one knows what a subatomic particle looks like. Yes, there's images and we've got ways to sort of depict it visually, so to understand it, but nobody knows what it looks like. He's gonna say that a lot.
What the word exists means. Just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And what criteria do we use? If you take even a step further, the real quandary is this. If indeed there is a creator, I'm only saying if to satisfy the skeptic.
But we know there isn't. Okay, so instead of saying if there is a creator, why wouldn't he say if there isn't a creator? Because if there isn't a creator, he will not be able to tell the difference in geological time, and in modern history, and in ancient history, and in antiquity. He won't be able to tell the difference whether he will be able. What am I trying to say? If a God does not exist, then everything that has happened up to now in existence would have been just the same. So a God existing doesn't change anything, and therefore is irrelevant. And by pure Occam's razor, we can just slice it out. Irrelevant. Goodbye. But this man is persistent. Listen.
If indeed there is a creator, can the creature really be the one that defines whether there's a creator or not?
If there really is a creator, okay, this is a if. Remember, everything that he's saying is if. And then he goes on to creature and blah, 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 blah. And he seems to get you to forget that he's talking about an if. And he'll get to the point where the if is no longer an if. The if is, it's now an axiom, right? He goes from an if to an axiom, and he transitions seamlessly somehow without explanation.
Is the creator that creates the creature, not the creature that creates the creator. So what can a creature really say about its creator? What can a...
Okay, well, you're a creature. You have a creator. What can you say about your creator, creature?
piece of art say about the artist?
What can a piece of art say about the artist? Okay, well, a piece of art, if it were able to speak, can say nothing about the artist. Now you, Simon, are a creature. There's nothing you can say about your creator. You can make up stuff. You can even make up that there is a creator, and then you can make up stuff that the creator wants, does. You can make up attributes, all sorts of things. But it's all made up. Remember, you said if. Don't forget, everybody, this conversation, this particular conversation he's having now with us, this monologue, started off with the word if.
It's a product of the artist. Let's go further. All logic and reason, if indeed there's a creator, the creator also created logic.
Yeah, okay. If indeed, if.
And reason.
Okay, so now he's talking shit. A creator does not create logic and reason. That's something that we get educated on. We find out about logic and reason through experience, through education, through being mentored, through your own interest in the subject. That's how logic and reason. He cannot go and make that leap. He makes lots of leaps. He says, if the creator created us, then he must also have created logic and reason. There's no connection, like a non sequitur. This guy, you. In fact, I'll talk to you, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. You're not a very smart person, and you say that you present yourself as a not very smart person by calling yourself rabbi. If somebody were to call me rabbi, I'd take that as an insult. Because rabbis know nothing. They know something about their fiction, yeah, maybe, but that's it. They know a lot about fiction. They know a lot of fiction, but they know nothing about the real world.
So to use logic and reason to try to understand the creator is a contradiction of...
No, it's not. No, it's not. Well, see, that's what I'm saying. He is saying that to use logic and reason to understand a creator is a contradiction in terms. That is, that is admitting that the Creator does not exist. To me, he's just saying, if you use logic and reason to come to the conclusion that God does not exist, then that's a contradiction in terms. Bullshit.
Terms. Because you can't bind the creator of logic and reason to the laws of logic and reason. In the words of physicists, something within a system cannot understand something outside of the system. Can we really perceive something outside of our own structure?
No. No. Especially if our own structure is the cosmos.
So then we get ourselves into a complete new dilemma, which is any God we talk about is really a God only simply based on our terms.
Thank you very much. He could end the lecture right here. End of story. Any God we talk about is basically somebody we create on our terms. Okay?
What we determine is the context and so on. It may not even be what God really is, because we're the ones talking about. Think of
You see? Presupposition right there. We might not, in our imaginations or in our definitions, we might not know what God really is. In other words, he's presupposing that God still exists when God doesn't exist. God is impossible.
Think of it this way: if we're part of a whole reality, how much can the part tell us about the whole when you're only a part? You're only one little piece of it.
So you're just one little piece of it, just like I am. Simon, how can you possibly pretend to know things that you can't know? How can you possibly preach to your class there about things that you cannot possibly know yourself? But you can demean and humiliate the atheists by calling them radical, and the agnostics by calling them radical. You're a dangerous man. You're not a nice man.
So there are much more dilemmas than one thinks when you talk about God, even though people so flippantly talk about God. God exists. I do believe. I don't believe.
God doesn't exist. So I think he understands deep down inside, because maybe he's not as stupid as I'm making him out to be. But I think that he's definitely a fraud. He's definitely a phony, because he's not going to make he's not going to make a coherent connection between the existence of God and it being axiomatic. He's not going to make that connection. Whereas I am claiming axiomatically that God does not exist. Prove me wrong.
And then, of course, the fact is that if it was so simple to prove or disprove God, then we'd have no argument, would we? Clearly,
listen to this.
it's not that simple.
Remember that I said that God is not a philosophical topic? God is it's empirical. It has to be empirical. For it to be as thunderous a topic that it is, God has to be empirical. Everything has to be empirical. Just like this man's going to admit about dark matter and stuff, it's still empirical.
All the proofs are rejected
Listen
by
to
people
this.
who don't want to accept those proofs. And the disproofs are rejected by people who do accept the proofs. So then what are the proofs worth? It's just a matter of choices. And we see that as a fact. You see the way they look at the world.
Okay.
So in a sense, it's like a circular type of argument, because you get nowhere.
See, this is the thing. He's focusing on the argument for God. He's not providing a solid platform for the debate about God by always insisting that axiomatically God exists. And this is where he trips up. This is where he trips himself up all the way through his lecture.
There are people who believe, and those that don't. And you could argue that belief is very much part of culture. Some people grew up with that, and therefore it's comfortable for them to believe in God. And some didn't. Or you could argue the other way around. Those that grew up with it may be the ones that rejected because they saw how hollow or hypocritical it was. So they're prejudiced the other way around. Anyway, as you see, basically, subjectivity comes into play big time in this discussion. So throwing out all these questions, my goal is really to be provocative, intentionally, and most importantly, to be able to address this in an intelligent manner, to say what can we know, what can we not know.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no question in the world that just like a piece of art can tell you very little about the artist. It can tell you.
Again, stupid thing to say. A piece of art can tell you nothing about the artist. How about a garden, well manicured with flowers and trees and hedges that are nicely carved and symmetrical? What can that garden tell you about the gardener? It's a stupid statement. He says this a lot. What can the painting tell you about the artist? It's dumb. Think about it. Just dumb. The painting can't talk. The painting is in a different dimension than the artist. The painting doesn't know the artist exists. Well, that's me giving the painting a brain. You know what I mean? It's dumb. It's dumb to give the painting, a consciousness.
Tell you that the artist has the capacity to create such art, but what else can it tell you about the artist? If the art was able to speak.
Why does it matter? Why is it relevant? It's like a dead end. You're chasing a dead end here, Simon.
Just like a computer or any machine, what can it tell you about?
It's like a computer. What can the computer tell you about
Its engineer.
Oh, the computer engineer. So the computer is the engineer. The computer, to him, it's just the software. Okay? He's talking. I'm assuming he's talking when he says computer engineer. I'm assuming he's meaning the computer software writer. No, computer software is not always written by one person. Computer software could be written by a team. So when he says, what can computer software tell about the engineer? There's lots of engineers. What about the engineers for the hardware? Is that included in his silly little analogy? What can the computer tell you about about the engineer? It's as dumb as he's talking donkey stories and he's burning bush stories, all that kind of crap.
Very little, because they're not in the same reality. So the question is, do we have even the tools to talk about God? And if we do talk about God, is it not merely simply another God that's an extension of our way of thinking? A God that we decide we need, a crutch, something that we feel gives us solace.
There you go.
Comfort,
See?
etc., etc.
You see? He said it. A crutch. God is a crutch. So you make it up in your head. This is not unknown psychiatry or psychology. You make it up in your head and you use it as a crutch. All the pain and anguish that you have inside of you, you pass along, you let your God in your head carry that. It's a relief. That's how it works.
So I decided to address this week for the reason being, because in this week's chapter in the Torah is a double chapter, Achrei Kedoshim, and the second of the double chapter, Kedoshim, starts Kedoshim Tiyu, you shall be sanctified. Sanctify yourselves. Kedoshim Tiyu, you shall be sanctified.
All right. Okay, now we're getting into something called sanctification, which he never explains. I don't know what it means, but he never explains it. We're supposed to know what it means. Can somebody maybe help me out in the chat? Sanctified.
It's a commandment. Ki kadeshani, because I, God, am sacred.
Okay, sacred. I, God, am sacred. What does that actually mean? I don't think it means anything.
Medrash, the Medrash is the oral interpretation of this verse says, Taras Kohanim on Leviticus, on this verse, that what's the meaning of the word be sacred, because I am sacred. So it says, because you could think that the Kameni, that you could be as holy as God is. And the Medrash says, no. Talmud comes say, my holiness is higher than yours. Which of course begs the question, what's the point the Torah is trying to tell us that God is holier than us? I mean, if someone believes in God, that's obvious. So there's an interesting Hasidic interpretation that actually turns around the Medrash and says something quite radical. It says the way you're supposed to read it is, Yochel Kamoyin, not a question, you may think that you're as holy as God. That's actually read as a statement. You can be as holy as God. Why? Kedushasi l'mayla, not l'mayla is interpreted as my holiness is greater than yours, but kedushasi l'mayla, my holiness above, is b'kedushaschem, is derived from and comes from your holiness. In other words, you sanctify me, which turns the whole meaning around that basically we have the power essentially to make God holy or to desecrate God. So reading that, I just thought it was appropriate. There could be any week this topic, just to talk about God and our relationship and understanding of the whole concept and so on and so forth.
So God is a concept, right? He just said so. So if God is a concept, then that's where it stops. Rabbi Simon Jacobson, God is a concept, I agree, but that's it. It's just a concept. No more need to be said.
You want to say something? Okay, so then I'm asking you, so 24/7 do you live without God? And have you ever done something that's not godly? If it's so...
There we go. Not godly. Now he's trying to paint a veneer of something that he calls godly over his God concept. Now, what does that mean? Let's find out.
No, I'm saying, if it's so provable, why is it that you can behave or I can behave in a way that goes against that? So even if you have that, it's a nice argument. And then there are many who just reject it. They have many explanations otherwise. It was a rhetorical question. Now, so taking all this into account, I think it's important to first establish a few things. I'll go now with the argument, if there is no God, if the universe is in some way evolved on its own, and that ball of gas that goes back 12 billion years ago, whatever, either created itself or was always there.
See, he doesn't know what he's talking about. That ball of gas that goes back 12 billion years or whatever. What ball of gas? What are you talking about? If you studied to be a rabbi, then talk about all the shit that you've studied, but don't try and pretend that you know anything about science. That ball of gas. This is where your pathetic closed-mindedness shows itself. In fact, I'd like to warn the viewers that he's actually going to accuse atheists of being closed-minded at some point, unless we've missed it.
However you explain that. Right. Then, of course, obviously, with that type of approach, then all we have is ourselves and our own minds, and you can't really go very far with that as far as God goes, because you've determined that we're self-made creatures.
He still hasn't come up with the definition of God, and he still hasn't told us how God actually matters or is relevant. You think you will?
And really there's no discussion if a person accepts that. Obviously there are many mysteries still to the left, because even if you can explain how those gases evolved into forms of life, you still have to explain how the gases got there. And as you just said accurately, one of the arguments in the Kuzri, another
So he's accepting that the gases, whatever the hell those are, the gases evolved into life. No, Rabbi, gases don't evolve into life. What happened was there was an expansion, and then there was inflation, and then the temperature cooled down enough for molecules to stick together and form like hydrogen, very simple molecules. And then the temperature of this big the temperature within the supernova, the where all the stars were being cooked, the temperature was enough to create elements that are more complex than hydrogen. For example, gold, minerals, and everything that we see on the periodic table. That's how it worked. Simon, that's how it worked. It didn't go from gases to people. I also want to tell you something about evolution, which I learned in my research, that single-celled life was present on this earth, which is 4 billion years old. Single-celled life was present on this earth fairly soon after the earth was formed. I don't know, let's say 500,000 years or so. I don't know exactly. But single-celled life there was. And the single-celled life went on for like 3 billion years, or somewhere around there, until multicellular life emerged. So gas to people is a bit of a stretch if that's the way you're trying to get your audience to understand how evolution works. Just think. 3 billion years of single cellular life until multicellular life emerged. And then it took another few hundreds of million years before more complex life emerged. That's evolution. In your version, with your God story, Simon, you have a God that is not created, creating the earth and Adam and Eve and everything like this. One day the animals are created, one day the mountains, one day the light, one day the dark, whatever. But one day the humans are created, or Adam and Eve is created. Bang, just like that. If that is the case, I have a question for you, Rabbi. If it was like that Adam and Eve were created, then how do you explain, how does evolution actually fit into the biblical narrative at all? How does evolution and creationism get along? I think creationism is a hoax. You cannot have evolution and creationism at the same time. But we know evolution exists. We know it's true. We can deduce that creationism is nonsense. The whole argument falls apart when evolution is accepted by you. Simon.
The books is the concept of ein dover eses atzmei, nothing can create itself. There's nothing in
the concept of nothing can create itself. Yeah, I guess not. Nothing can create itself. That makes sense, doesn't it? Let's see where he goes with this.
Existence that's self-made. Every one of us is the product of parents. Our parents are the product of parents. Every species, everything on earth comes from some previous form. So then it leads us to say that the earliest form could also not have created itself because we're made of the same substance. That first cause, so to speak, has to have a cause before it.
No. Energy is eternal. Haven't you learned that, Rabbi Simon Jacobson? Energy is eternal. Energy, there was never a time when there was not energy. Okay? We can show that. There was never a time when there wasn't energy, and energy powers existence. Energy is eternal, existence is eternal. That is something that you need to accept, Rabbi, and everybody that you lecture to. Preach the truth to them, Rabbi. Don't lie.
Which is the conventional argument of nothing can create itself. Now, many scientists and others choose to reject that argument because I believe it's not purely because of logic, because there's also another factor. And I've talked about this to a number of scientists that consider themselves atheists. I said, I know you accuse believers of being closed-minded. You know, a believer just believes, and no proof in the world is going to shake that belief. Right? Whereas a scientist is a person who should be able to be open to all arguments, whether for God or against God, without any prejudice. But there's one question here. We all know that in any type of argument, intelligent argument, there has to be what we call full disclosure. Right? We have to be transparent. Now, in a court of law, the first question that you would ask about any given issue is the parties involved, do they have any bias or any interest in a resolution that is either one way or the other way? If a judge, for example, is invested financially or otherwise because of a relative in the verdict being guilty or not guilty, he or she has to recuse themselves because they're biased. Now, this God issue has a lot of bias involved. Number one bias is that if there is indeed a God, it would compel us to be accountable. Who wants to be accountable? So we all have invested interest, because if there is a God and it's absolute so, and God puts you here, then that would compel us to accept that we are responsible to God. I think many people are invested in making sure they're not responsible and accountable. So I've asked a number of scientists, why don't you make that statement before you make your argument? Say, you know something? I have benefit to believe that there is no God, because then I can do what I wish. So just like you're expecting believers...
Okay, that is stupid. That is really the dumbest thing I've heard anybody say. Listen to this, what he says. He says, if I don't believe in God, I can do as I wish. Yeah, I don't believe in God. I know God is impossible. I know God does not exist, and I do as I wish. Right? I don't have to make excuses for what I want to do but don't do because of God. This is where Abrahamic religions fall down flat, because everything negative converges on the topic of sex and intimacy. If I don't believe in God, if he says if I do believe in God, then I'm restrained in what I can do. But if I don't believe in God, I can do anything I want. This is where he's going. And to do anything you want, to him, is a negative. Because, and I think when people say that, what this guy says, it's a window into this man's character. Because he would do all these things that he mentions that he doesn't do because he believes in God. Stupid. The guy's got no moral backbone whatsoever.
To be open and transparent and say we have biases because either we believe because we grew up that way, or because we believe because it makes us easier to deal with pain, or whatever it is. Why don't you say the same thing, that you have interest involved in the fact that there is a conclusion that can have consequences. And therefore that would somewhat bias you to try to argue there is no God. Like you'll often hear the argument, very often, that in the primitive times people had no other way of explaining phenomena except with God. If there was an earthquake, if there was a hurricane, if there's something else that happened, it had to be God's hand.
Right.
But today that we have natural ways to explain it, scientific ways, we don't need God. That's one of the arguments against God. But that's a very limited perspective on.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to go and refill this precious coffee cup. I will be right back. Here's some music for while you wait. Okay, thank you so much for waiting. Let's just carry on.
God. There's many other reasons that you could come to God, even with a world like ours. Like I just mentioned, the argument of nothing can create itself. But above all, we all are looking for ways to make our lives more comfortable. If you had a choice to be accountable or not accountable, which one would you choose? You really had complete choice. And you're honest. Most people would rather be less accountable. Let's be honest. Maybe at times, we like.
What is he talking about? Most people would want to be less accountable. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. You see, this is you. This is your mind, Simon. This is what you're saying. You don't want to be honest. You want to be less honest. And I bet you that you are less honest in your life. Even though you have this God veneer masking over your dishonesty. I know about people like you, Simon.
The idea to be responsible to someone, but on our terms, especially when it comes to personal matters. So I searched and searched. I wanted to see if there's any scientist ever in history who argued against God that was ready to say, be open. Now, believers, you're going to find a lot of closed-minded believers who are not ready to be objectively describe why they believe. But believers can be dismissed because they're not using logic. But a scientist and a thinker and a free thinker is following logic. So,
all right, this man is now going to lie, or he's going to obfuscate.
Following logic, why does he not accept that element? So I did find one, Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley, I'll paraphrase because I don't remember the exact language, it's quite eloquent. He writes the following. He was an agnostic, maybe even atheist, I don't remember what he called himself. So what did he write? What did he write? He wrote the following. I'm invested in the fact that there should be no God, because then I can do it as I wish, especially in the area of sexuality.
There you go. That's where I said. See, this is where he's mentioning Aldous Huxley, because of what Aldous Huxley said, that without God, he can do whatever he wants and be sexually promiscuous or whatever. See, this is where it goes. This is all it's about. It's about controlling your sexuality. It's about repressing your urges, your feelings. It's about ignoring your own sexuality. This is dangerous. These Abrahamic cults are extremely dangerous. They indoctrinate and poison your minds.
These are his words, pretty blunt. And therefore, all my arguments follow that my first axiom. Now, I was very taken that he wrote that. Why? Because at least he's honest. He's not coming to say this.
No, he's not honest. He's not honest. He was pulling your leg. If I had to say I'm an atheist only because I can go and be promiscuous, then that doesn't address why I want to be promiscuous, because it's got nothing to do with religion. It's got more to do with psychology and psychiatry and your ethical makeup. It's got nothing to do with God or no God. It's your ethical makeup. It's your it's how you use your common sense. It's how you give everybody their space. It's how you don't consider yourself better or higher than another human being. I'm a humanist, first and foremost. And what I see in these Abrahamic preachers like Rabbi Simon here is an absolute lack, a total lack of humanism. It's all about covering up his own lasciviousness, let's say. That's what these people want to do. They want to make excuses for having lascivious thoughts and maybe even acting upon it, but knowing that, it's not what God would want, and I've fallen short, and blah 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 blah. This is what they do.
I'm an objective guy, and I'm doing my research, and whatever conclusion I'll accept. No, he's very interested in a particular conclusion, and that's that. Now, again, this doesn't necessarily say that that this doesn't prove or disprove God. Karl Popper, the philosopher of science, the Austrian-British philosopher.
Okay, Karl Popper is a philosopher. God is not a topic of philosophy, at least in this context. You axiomatically believe, know that God exists. I axiomatically know that God is impossible. God cannot exist. Axiomatically. So we got two competing axioms here. That's really what it is. We should have an axiom face-off one day. My axiom against your axiom, and we'll see whose axiom stands up to scrutiny. Come on, Simon.
Science writes famously that a scientific hypothesis has to be able to be disproven, not just proven, disproven. If you cannot disprove a scientific hypothesis, it's not science, because science is subject to the rules of proof and disproof. That's why you see theories come and go.
If you can't disprove a scientific hypothesis, it's not science? Is that what he said?
Now, some theories withstand the test of time, but a theory is exactly that. It's the best.
Some theories withstand the test of time. But the theory of evolution, Simon, does that withstand the test of time? Or are you actually going to go there, I wonder?
Working theory for what we have, and results and other ways of proving it and replicating, etc. And he gives the example. to say that God exists cannot be a scientific statement because no one can disprove it. Whether you can prove it or not, another, but no one can disprove it.
It doesn't matter if you can prove that God exists or not. It doesn't matter. But what's really important is that you can't disprove God. Oh, that's so important. In fact, the fact that you cannot disprove God is more important than the fact that you cannot prove God. Ta-da! This is the way they... This is what they do. This is what these Abrahamics do. These cultists. That's the best they got. It's more important that you cannot disprove God than it is that you cannot prove God. That's what he said.
That's why even the most radical atheists in their moment, if you ask them, are you certain, 100% certain there's no God?
Yes, I am. I am the most radical atheist, and if you ask me, are you 100% certain there is no God? Yes. Yes, I will say. So don't come and put words in my mouth that come out as no.
They'll never say that, 100% certain.
Bullshit. I'm 100% certain. I'm 100% certain that there is no God. Prove me wrong. Show me how you're 100% certain that there is a God. Makes sense. Show me. Because now you've got an is. And when you've got an is, you've got to present it.
They'll say, I'm also not 100% certain there are no fairies.
I'm also not 100% certain there's no fairies. You see, this is where he goes. He's gone from no atheist will say 100% certainty that there is no God, and he will also go and say, I'm not 100% certain that there are no fairies. Makes me want to just tug on his beard and say, dumbass.
Christopher Hitchens, Olav HaShalom said. Christopher Hitchens had a Jewish mother. As the three famous atheists of our time, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, two Jews, and the third one, Richard Dawkins. He's not been yet found to be Jewish. But these are, Christopher Hitchens wrote God is Not Great. Hitchens had their book. They had their books on this topic. So Hitchens has said a number of times, before he passed away a few years ago, he can't disprove it absolutely. But the burden of proof lies on those that believe, not those that don't.
Correct.
This would be called, agnostic is someone who's in doubt, no proof either way. Atheist is someone who's almost sure or very sure, and so on. I'm not going to go through every particular level. I once wrote an article about this topic,
which you know nothing about,
and I was rudely reminded by a number of atheists, because I just piled all the atheists together, and they said there are many different, just like there are many types of believers, there are many types of atheists. I alluded to earlier. There are radical atheists. There are moderate atheists.
What is a radical atheist? Am I a radical atheist? I do not accept that I'm a radical atheist. I accept that I'm a strong atheist. I'm not radical.
There are average atheists. So atheism itself has many schools of thought. I think there's American Atheistic Society of America or something like that. So there you can go through, you can check it out online if you happen to be interested in that. So going back to the topic at hand, so we're left with what? What are we left with here? Now, for those that do believe and do accept there's a God, there are those that just do it out of cultural reasons and don't give it much thought. They haven't thought about it too much. But those that have thought about it and have challenged it come to a conclusion that if there's indeed a God, that's the only reason we can talk about God, because God himself gave us information and embedded in our DNA ways to understand the Creator.
DNA now! Where in the Bible does it mention DNA? So he's claiming that God has embedded in our DNA in such a way that we know that there's a creator. This is a nonsensical claim. See, he's sticking his God into the DNA chain. He's lying. That's an outright lie. Rabbi Simon Jacobson, you are a liar.
So that basically essentially states that there is a given that if God created the universe, created with design and purpose.
If God created the universe, if, do not forget that this man prefaces every bullet point with if God exists, if.
And communicated that design and purpose, or else there'd be no point to existence and creation. And as such, God also revealed to us ways to communicate or ways to understand what God is about.
Is that a fact? Well, that's a big claim. Big claim. So now where's the backup?
Or in the words of the Bible, God created the
There's your backup. The Bible.
Human being in the divine image. And therefore we in our own personality, or as the book of Job puts it, from my flesh I behold God. If you study the art and you study the creation, which is created in the shape and image of the Creator, then you can get a sense of what the Creator is like.
Oh, and how do you study that? How do you study that exactly? To get the sense of what a Creator is like. I think you're talking nonsense. Absolute fucking nonsense.
And that's going to be part of what I'm going to be discussing shortly in understanding God. But let's do this in a process of elimination, working our way backwards from the bottom up. I mentioned before, we have to determine what does it mean. Before we define what God is, we have to define what means existence. Or better rephrased, what does reality mean?
Reality means reality. Just so, in case he gets it wrong, I just want to let you know that reality means reality.
I've discussed this somewhat in my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, in the chapter on God. So some of these ideas, if you want to follow up, you can check it out in that chapter. I'm going to elaborate more than that is there. So I think the first thing that I think an intelligent approach to this has to be is looking at the tools and the logic and reason we use to determine anything. How do we know anything exists? So there were philosophers, I forget who by name.
Again, he's going to philosophy when he should stay away from philosophy. If he's talking about the God concept and God existing or God not existing, that's not philosophy. You can either show us that your God exists, or I can carry on claiming that why I know 100% for sure that God cannot exist, that God is impossible. There you go. I'm claiming that God is impossible because everything that happens in this universe is independent of a God needing to be there at all. It's all nature. It's all natural.
That argued and could argue, and anyone could argue this, that all of existence is an illusion.
No one can argue that.
Disprove that? It's impossible to disprove, because any proof or disproof is part of the illusion. If, for example, like the Matrix showed, that all of existence as we know it is a computer program that somebody is controlling, so anything we come up with, proving or disproving, is all part of that program. So it's built in that you can't disprove that existence is an illusion. So how do we come to to accept that existence is a reality and not an illusion? It's just simply, like many other axioms, that we just accept it to be that way. I don't know if you know this, but science, especially Karl Popper as well, and more than Karl Popper, also Gödel, the great mathematician, and similarly Heisenberg in physics, quantum mechanics, made the argument that, and has been accepted now as a scientific fact, that science, even with all its logic and reason, always has to have axioms that are not necessarily based on reason. Even mathematics, which was considered to be the absolute science, everything is provable. So Gödel demonstrated in the mid-20th century which was very radical, but he'd proven that even mathematics is based on certain givens that just all mathematicians and all scientists accept. Because every system has to have axioms. And axioms do not necessarily mean they've been reasoned or proven. They're not irrational, but they're not necessarily proof. I'll give you a classic example. It's accepted by all scientists that if you have several theories to explain a phenomenon, you choose the simplest explanation. Nobody knows why.
Dumb. This is the dumbest thing I've heard. This guy's claiming that the simplest explanation is not the best explanation. He's going to lobby for the more complex explanation, for the more complex. God is so complex, therefore you should have a complex explanation, he's saying. What a lot of shit. This is where he gets fucking annoying when he does this. He presumes an air of holier than thou. I know things you don't, and it's not coming across well for him.
You just accept it. That the simplest theory, the simplest explanation is the one that will be accepted unless it's disproven. Why? Because scientists, you could say the logic works that you try to find the simplest path to answer questions. But someone could say, how do you know? Maybe the most complex answer should be the one. Now, this is not meant to, this was the word I want to say, discredit the scientific method. It's just meant to be honest about what science is and what it's not. So a real scientist will tell you, I don't need God to explain much of existence, or maybe all of it. Mm-hmm. Because I can explain how human beings evolved from apes, that evolved from lower species, all the way back to bacteria, to that ball of gas.
Well, if that is true, then how does creationism work, Rabbi? If the evolutionary scientist can explain all that, then how does your Adam and Eve popping to existence and the story about the rib and all this crap, how does that all work without evolution? If evolution is accepted by you. And another question. You mentioned DNA. If you mention DNA, then how then does Adam's rib, which comes from a man, how does Adam's rib become a woman when its DNA is constructed into a person? How does that happen, Rabbi? You don't answer these questions. You just try and promote fear, and you promote hypocrisy. Your thinking is not very clear, not very coherent, and you're biased.
If you ask me what was before the ball of gas, science has nothing to answer because we were not there. We have no.
Is that right? Were we there after the ball of gas? Before the planet, before the stars were created? We weren't there.
Witnesses, and we're trying to figure it out. We have theories. That's what an honest scientist will tell you. Is it possible that God started the whole thing? Yeah.
No! That's a lie. A scientist will not say, yeah. A scientist will not say, is it possible that God started everything? Yes. No scientist will say that. A Christian scientist might, but a real objective scientist will never say that. You are a liar, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. You are a liar.
How could I say not? Again, a scientist who does not have any interest in bias or has no preconceived notions. That would be the approach. You could say, I can explain much without it, but I can't explain everything without it. But once I use God, the scientist will say, I've gone out of the world of science. We've gone from physics to metaphysics. Okay, that's a fair discussion. So I don't claim that I am an expert in that area, and I only can talk about phenomena that I can relate to, or that can be discussed with some type of empirical or other forms of extrapolation that scientists have by consensus agreed to. And that's what we approach it with.
Okay. I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm going to call this part 1. Welcome to this episode. My name is Sidney Winston, and you're watching Reason Speak. This is part 2 of my reaction to Rabbi Simon Jacobson, who is spewing a whole bunch of nonsense at us, but very, very tactically. He's got a process. His process is this: never talk about if God doesn't exist. He never says if God doesn't exist, then blah blah blah, except for one exception. Always talk about if God exists, then this, then that, and the other, and laws and rules and genital mutilation. That's okay on little boys. Everything's fine. But if God doesn't exist, then you got problems because you think of sex all the time. This is where he goes. This is where these theists always go. If God doesn't exist, then there's what's stopping me from following my sexual drive and the lustful thoughts and making them real and la 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 la. What's wrong with that? If there's no God, that's what I would be doing. Is basically what Rabbi Simon Jacobson is saying. If you watch part 1, well, you know what he's been saying. If you haven't watched part 1, it doesn't make really much of a difference because he doesn't say anything different at all. Ultimately, it's if God exists, then, and his presupposition is always that God exists. And you can't argue with that because then he doesn't want to know you. Then you're a radical atheist or a radical agnostic. He makes up all these terms that mean nothing. Anyway, listen to him some more.
Let's go back to what I'm saying is, so how do we determine? So the first axiom is that we accept that existence is real. It's not an illusion.
How's that? First axiom, we accept that existence is real. Okay? But when you accept an axiom that existence is real, that existence itself is axiomatic. So there's nothing prior to existence. It's always been. It's eternal. Okay? So he's starting off agreeing with my position that existence is eternal. And if existence is eternal, then a creator God is a story, is a concept and a fantasy and I wish it were so, but it isn't. It's reality. That's what I don't really understand about these theists. They accept reality, but then they don't accept reality.
Because if it's an illusion, all our discussions are meaningless.
If reality is an illusion, then all our discussions are meaningless. Exactly. So reality is existence is reality. Reality is existence eternally. They somehow always forget to say the eternal nature of reality. Because that's what it is. It's eternal. this whole God thing is a hoax. It's a scam. It's because they've got no other skills, so they sell snake oil to you. These people are nothing but not even snake oil salesmen. They sell they go for your weaknesses, and they try and make you feel really nothing. They make you feel as if you're nothing, and then they sell you God to make you feel like you're something. They're a bunch of fakers. These guys. This is all a hoax. This is all fake. It's all a performance art that's been going on for centuries. It's all nonsense. Personally, I would be okay with it if I didn't know that these people, at the same time that they're promulgating this nonsense, they're also promulgating and selling to Jewish couples that have babies. They're selling genital mutilation of their sons. This is what they sell to the Jewish community. Get married. It's a very happy time. Let's dance for joy because you're getting married. And then you have a son, and the son is in the mother's arms and the father's arms for 1 week, for 8 days. For 8 days, the beautiful baby son is bonding with the mother, hopefully with the father, but surely with the mother. And then, on the 8th day of this baby's journey through life, the mother of this baby, 8 days old, the mother gives the baby to a person with a scalpel and a beard. And that person, for no reason whatsoever other than a religious, what they call a covenant with God, which is, in my view, that is child abuse. That is criminal. I think ritual genital mutilation is criminal. You have no excuse for harming little children, for harming babies. None whatsoever. So stop it. Maybe people wouldn't hate you so much if you stopped it. If you were just normal, rational people, because most of you are, except for this ritual genital mutilation thing. All of a sudden you go, oh, that's okay. Otherwise it's love. This guy's going to start talking about love. And, he's already spoken about love. But at the same time, he supports ritual genital mutilation of 8-day-old boys. It's abominable. In my view, it is anyway.
But if it's real, so then how do we define reality? How would you define reality? So the obvious, as I said, we'll start from the bottom up. The first way you define reality is by saying, my 5 senses. Since I've accepted that my eyes, what they see is real, it's not an illusion. Even though, of course, you can argue we see magicians, sleight of hand, and we could be fooled with optical illusions. But let's, for argument's sake, most things that we see, we can rely on. We all see this white wall. If you showed it to 1 million people, they'd all describe it the same way. So that's pretty much strong evidence that there is a white wall, and that it's white, and that it's shaped so-and-so. Why? Because enough eyes have seen it and borne witness. That is considered to be a fact. That's what we would call a fact. In other words, anything that our senses experience, let's say all of us would agree is a fact. Enough people heard a sound You'll say, okay, I accept that, even if I didn't hear it. If enough people tell us that the George Washington existed a few hundred years ago and there's...
See, this is bullshit. If enough people tell me that George Washington existed, I'll believe it. Well, that's an absolute stupid, lazy answer. If enough people tell me. Go read an encyclopedia and do your own fucking research and don't rely on other people telling you. Rabbi Simon Jacobson.
News accounts, and there's enough witnesses and enough books and so on, you don't come to think, oh, there's a conspiracy of 50 people or 100 or 1,000 people that created an illusion called George Washington, and they just created forged newspapers and forged books and forged witnesses, false witness, and now we don't say that. Is it possible? Of course it's possible. But there's certain accepted verification, what we call...
Yeah, it's possible, and Jesus is the outcome of the possible. Okay? George Washington is not something that is created out of thin air and unverified. Okay? Jesus is. Moses is, in your case, Simon. Moses is a fabrication, is a myth. Where does that leave you when you accept that? But you must.
Call facts. If enough witnesses, testimony from different parties across the board. So this is called the empirical approach. And we'll take questions at the end, because since there's a class and a lot of people, so if you don't mind. Okay, so this is, you have many, so our senses tell us a certain dimension of reality. But if you limit it to that...
Our senses tell us a limited dimension of reality. Dimension of reality. It's a 3D. Reality is 3D. There's no certain dimension. Rabbi Simon, how is there a certain dimension for some and a certain dimension for others when reality is three-dimensional? Tell me that. But you can't, so you won't.
Then comes the question, one second. What about things that the senses don't experience? And I mentioned one before. I mentioned love. Love. You say, I love this person.
There he goes.
How can you empirically prove that? All you can say is, I feel love.
Okay, let's go back to the genital mutilation issue when it comes to love. Okay, so this is where it gets me. This is where I just can't process. Okay, so the Jewish couple give birth to this baby boy, and they love this baby boy, and he's talking about love. You can't explain it. You can't. It's beyond our senses. But you love this baby boy. La, 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 la. But after 8 days, you have to take your baby boy. He wants to take your baby boy away from you and give it to somebody to chop the foreskin, to snip the foreskin, to remove the foreskin, whatever. Oh, it's pretty gross. Where does love come into that, Rabbi? You're inflicting incredible pain on a 1 week old, defenseless baby boy. Where's the love? For those watching who are intactivists, ask these guys, when they preach love, where's the love in genital mutilation?
Someone else says, I don't feel it. I believe you that you say it, but I mean, how do you measure the reality of this thing called love? How do you measure the reality even of love in general? So clearly you need something more than just senses, because there's nothing that your eyes, your ears, your taste, touch, and smell can measure in what we call love. So then how do we know? Because we have other senses. We have supersensory tools. Since I know I can love somebody, so I can imagine that you can love somebody.
I can imagine that you can love somebody, yes. And you can imagine that I can love somebody. Yes. But I can't imagine how you can love somebody and let's say it's your son. Your son is born. You love your son, yet you give your son up for genital mutilation. How is that in any way a sign of love, a signal of love? You fucking hypocrite, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. You're a fucking hypocrite. And this guy is going to talk about love, 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 love. He's never once going to mention the pain of genital mutilation on an 8-day-old infant boy, baby boy, newborn boy.
So in a sense, it's through the common human experience that we can identify other realities. Same thing with ideas. Nobody's ever seen an idea. Ideas are creations of the mind.
Bingo! God is his idea, is an idea. It's a creation of the mind. But he knows it. He's not an idiot. He knows it. But his job is to sell you the snake oil. Yes, ideas are created in the mind. God is an idea, a concept in the mind. Because that's the only time you ever come across this God, is when somebody else is talking about God and how good and the attributes and blah, 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 blah. But we all live in this 3D reality and good God, good? No. No. Love and genital mutilation. This is what these guys are hitting you with from both sides. And they want to be respected? Nah. Fuck these guys.
But because you come up with ideas, so you can accept that someone else comes up with ideas. Why would you not? So here you have a next...
So, yeah, you come up with your concept of God, and I come up with my concept of God. If you come up with your criteria for believing in God, if God existed, and I come up with my criteria for believing in God, if God existed. And if you listened to the beginning, where I was having a conversation with Gary Mill, that's what I said.
Next level of experience, which is not directly witnessed or experienced with the five senses, but nevertheless is considered to be also factual.
You know what is? You know what is experienced through the five senses? Genital mutilation of an 8-day-old baby boy. I bet you can feel that with your senses, right, Rabbi? And why don't you preach about some love while you're about it? And I'm thinking, and we're all thinking here of the abominable practice of ritual genital mutilation on 8-day-old baby boys. Not good. It's a crime against humanity. I'm proclaiming it a crime against humanity. Bodily autonomy for everybody, not just females. Bodily autonomy for everybody. United Nations, get on it.
Now, how far can you go with logic here? So you can go pretty far. Because now, let's talk about, let's say, I just spoke about conscious ideas. What about unconscious?
Conscious ideas and unconscious ideas? What?
Conscious ideas, as I said, you can experience through common human experience. But what about...
Like God, if one existed.
About unconscious? How do we know there's an unconscious? And that...
How do we know there's an unconscious? How do you know, dear viewer, if how do you know that there's an unconscious? Does it even make any sense? How do you know that there's a conscience? Because, well, you and I are communicating and understanding each other. How do you know there's an unconscious? Unconscious. I'm at a loss for it.
The answer is because logic dictates that if conscious mind is aware of certain ideas as we speak right now, and you know that you have many more ideas inside your mind that you're not conscious of, you have to...
You have many more ideas. You know that you have many more ideas in your head that you're not conscious of. How do you know that? You just know that you're going to have many more ideas. Everything that you're not doing right now is what you're conscious of. Any ideas that come later on, of course you're not conscious of them, or you don't care. Or any ideas that you had before, you're not conscious of at the time either. So okay, maybe I'm getting a little bit too. I'm going to start breathing in slowly and start to relax and start to enjoy Rabbi Simon Jacobson's thoughts.
To say that your brain contains many other ideas that you're not aware of at this moment. We also know that human life experiences as children become embedded in our personalities. So any type of trauma that we experience or any type of positive thing affects our behavior later. That's not a conscious thing. That's what is called unconscious. Now, no one has ever seen the unconscious, but you can extrapolate what is called in Torah language, Yedias Hashlila, which means you can't see it directly, but you can infer, or call extrapolate instead of intrapolation is extrapolation.
Make your fucking mind
that
up.
It exists. The black hole is a perfect example in physics of extrapolation. There are scientists and physicists that deny that there's the concept of a black hole, or what they call today black matter, black energy.
Bullshit. Black hole, or what they call black matter, black energy. Bullshit. Black holes and dark matter and dark energy are different things. So this guy here, Rabbi Jacobson, is trying to teach you science, but wrong science. So don't listen to a rabbi when he talks to you about science. In fact, don't listen to a rabbi when he talks to you about anything, because he's full of it.
Energy, dark energy, and so on. Because no one can see a black hole. By definition,
Oh, really? We've got a picture now. We've got a picture now.
and it's black. How do we know it exists? So the theory goes like this, because when you see areas, large areas in space that are behaving erratically and are moving about in ways and can't explain why they would be moving that way. So the theory that first Einstein posited and then he actually retracted and then came back to it is that there must be a body there that's exerting such a powerful gravity that's affecting the movement of anything that comes in its proximity. But no one's seen those bodies. You just see their effect.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if there was I was holding a magnet, right, on this side of a wall, you can't see me or the magnet. But you see on the other side of the wall, metal pieces moving around strangely. So you can extrapolate and say, you know what? There must be something exerting energy that's causing an erratic movement of metal. So you can extrapolate and say, and infer there must be somewhere a magnet, even though you can't see it. And applying it psychologically to the unconscious, you could see, for example, a trained psychologist, therapist. I'm talking about a good one. There are many bad ones, but we're talking about a good one. Would be, what do they see that others don't see? You go to a trained person who's able to talk to you, able to have a conversation, and they can come away with somewhat of an understanding of your psyche that another person does not come away with. What is it that they have? Is it an instinct? Is it an intuition? Is it something you could be trained? So one of the ways to understand it, yes, clearly some people simply understand human beings better, or may have experienced themselves certain experiences in life, so making them more empathetic and can relate to other people who've had trauma or pain and so on. So one of the ways to explain it is the following. Like when you go to a physical doctor, medical doctor, and let's say you have a pain in your arm or a pain elsewhere, God forbid. So the doctor will ask some questions, then may examine you, and come away with, let's say that you have pain in your right arm. Okay, touch here, touch here. And you start saying, oh, that's where it hurts. And it tries and feels it out, and gets a sense, if need be, to take an X-ray or CAT scan or another sonogram or something else, to try to understand what are the causes that the physical eye, the naked eye cannot see. So the trained physician, knowing human anatomy, having experience, can pretty much identify, not always, but can identify from symptoms, causes that most of us are not trained cannot. No different than, for example, people who are very experienced in business can forecast certain things, not because they're prophets, because their experience has taught them to look for certain signs that the average novice cannot see. Anyone?
What a Nazi? Don't be talking about Nazis. That's a very, very, very taboo subject. Tom and John, how you doing? I recognize you in the chat, and I've put you guys up on screen so everybody can read your prose. Actually, if you can hear that, meowing in the background, that's because I've got to take care of something in the animal world. So please allow me a few seconds to 30 seconds to take care of it, and I'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. To Simon.
Anyone with a level of expertise, whatever area it is going to see things that the novice cannot see. You know, you look at it, it'll look like random, someone else will see a pattern. The same thing is psychologically. A person who's trained can ask the right questions and can have a discussion and can learn from that much about your psyche more than you yourself may be even willing to share, because they know how you respond.
I know exactly about this guy's psyche. He's indoctrinated, even though he's probably smart enough to know that he's indoctrinated. But I think more it's his business. His business is teaching this nonsense. And if it's nonsense and you're getting paid for it to teach, you teach it. It's a living. It's a living. It's a job. You know, he could make that. I'd accept that as an excuse. It's, you know, people buy it. People listen. People buy it. They give me money. Snake oil, easy.
You study body language. For example, most of us, in areas where there's a lot of pain, psychic pain, meaning personal pain, psychological pain, we avoid. We don't like to discuss it, just like...
Bullshit! Who says we don't like to discuss it? Are you fucking kidding me? On the internet? You could talk about anything. You can find groups that focus on anything. Psychological pain is one of them. You are uninformed, Simon. Simon Jacobson. You are an uninformed man. You should be ashamed of yourself.
You avoid touching something where there's a raw nerve, a tender nerve. So a trained person who's asking questions suddenly sees, for example, you don't want to talk about your mother. You say, is everything all right with your mother? Yeah, perfect. We have a great relationship. So let's talk about it. And if you see resistance, you can pretty much extrapolate there's something going on.
Psychology 101, ladies and gentlemen. Psychology 101 from a rabbi. A low-life, know-nothing, lie, what am I trying to say? I'll leave it right there. And get out while I cut my losses and get out of this one.
Now, I'm not talking about in any way an assault or anything that crosses boundaries and trying to, try to find out about someone's life without their cooperation. I'm talking about a trained person who will do it gently and sensitively. So think of it, this is the way I always put it, is like think of an imaginary wall shrouded in darkness.
Okay, let's focus more on what's written in the chat. Tom in the chat makes a really, really good point. He says, females are protected by federal law, and this is regarding female genital mutilation. Females are protected by federal law. Yes, they are. You cannot go and perform anything on a female. A female is born. You can't mutilate her genitals. You can't even pierce her ear or put a ritual scratch on her pinky. The laws are on the books for girls, and boys should have equal rights. It's already illegal to tattoo or cut their pinky finger. There you go. You can't put a tattoo on a baby, but you can. But a baby boy, you can mutilate his genitals. 8 days fucking old, and this is what you do. And you talk about love at the same time. Jesus Christ, Simon, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should come out with a reaction video to me raging on you like this. Wouldn't that be fun?
And you can't touch this wall, and you can't shine a light on it. But you want to know what it looks like. Is it a straight wall? Is it a jagged wall? Is it a broken wall? What options do you have to be able to figure out what the wall? You can't touch it, you can't see it, and you can't shine a light on it. So here's one option. You take a rubber ball, and you bounce it against the wall, and you see how it bounces back to you. If it bounces straight, you know that's a straight area in the wall. And you keep bouncing the ball again and again and again, and you can get something like a sonar. Sonars that pick up the entire topography of, let's say, the ocean bed, even though no one's gone there, but the sonar gives you back signals that you can identify
this
the
guy's a brilliant
scientist,
don't you think?
So the same thing is here. By having a conversation with someone and seeing how they react, with enough conversations, you can get yourself somewhat of a picture of what the psyche looks like. Not an entire picture, and it's not always perfect, but someone who's trained can get that sense. So here you have a new tool.
I'm not trained in, I know what your psyche looks like.
It's not
Simon.
Empirically observable or experienced through the five senses. It's not experienced through common experience, like I said before about love and ideas. And it's because it's the unconscious, but...
Ooh, common experience. Let's talk about common experience, Simon. How about the common experience of male genital mutilation on 8-day-old baby boys born into your cult, Simon? You talk about love, but you somehow overlook the very, very serious tradition of male genital mutilation, which is sanctioned by almost every government, as far as I know, on earth. Hopefully there's going to be at least one country that'll make it illegal, prosecutable, to penetrate or violate the bodily autonomy rights of every single human being until they reach the age of majority, which is usually 21. Because at 18 you're still a teenager, at 19 you're still a teenager, at 20 you're kind of just not quite a teen. You're not a teenager, but you're sort of in between. So 21. You're 21 years old. There you go. You're an adult. Make your own choices. But until then, don't touch anyone's body without their consent. And an 8-day-old baby boy cannot give his consent. And I want Jewish mothers who give up their babies, I want them to consider this, that little boy that you've loved for 8 days has not given his consent to be genitally mutilated by people like Rabbi Simon Jacobson and his cult. Let us continue.
But clearly, other evidence has brought you to come to conclusions that there's something there, and you can figure out somewhat of what it may look like. This is essentially, by the way, how the physicists see the atomic and subatomic world. You know, an atom has never been seen by the human race. There's no person that can see subatomic particles. And there's no instrument, even the strongest electron microscopes cannot see subatomic particles. They're just too microscopic. But you could see their effect. You see their impact. You know, that model that we learned in high school, that atoms look like a bunch of grapes, with the neutrons being white and protons being black and electrons looking like a field of energy. That's simply a working model to allow us to work with something. No one knows if atoms look that way at all. So there's a lot of imagery we
So
get
what?
that doesn't mean it means
It
different
works.
ways. Something
You just
to
said.
work with so you can understand. But there's no question that
The
there's
model
subatomic
works.
particles. So who was it? I think it was Sir Arthur Eddington, maybe. I forgot his name. One of the physicists in the mid-20th century, early 20th century, was asked the classic question: if no one has ever seen subatomic particles, how can you come to these bizarre, and they called it bizarre, spooky world of quantum mechanics? It's called spooky physics, even till this day.
I have never ever heard of quantum mechanics being called spooky physics. Have you ever heard of quantum mechanics being referred to as spooky physics? This guy has. This guy knows it all. Rabbi Simon, he knows it all.
Because its conclusions were all counterintuitive. Whereas in Newtonian physics, for example, everything is defined by classic physics of cause and effect. The billiard ball effect. So the billiard ball effect is what? That when you hit a billiard, if you hit it with a cue, you hit a ball this way, every time you'll hit it this way and that angle, it will always have the impact on the next ball the same way. This predictable, deterministic universe. This is the way physics was seen all the way till the beginning, or the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. Then came Einstein with the theory of special relativity, and then later quantum mechanics, Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and the others, and determined that in the microscopic universe, not macroscopic, in the microscopic universe, there's a whole new reality that is absolutely indeterministic, states of probability, these are their words, where you cannot determine certain things. And it was adamantly fought by Einstein himself, said, it doesn't make sense. One of the lines he used when he spoke to Niels Bohr about it was, God does not play dice with the universe. Everything is predictable. Everything is logical. And Niels Bohr purportedly responded, don't tell God what to do. Very similar to what I said earlier in this class, that if God is the one that determines whether it's deterministic or not we do. And Einstein, till his last days, even though he had to admit certain conclusions, was very disturbed by this type of approach because it was not logical, seemingly.
Can we get any verification of that? I've never heard of that. I've never heard that to his very last days, Einstein was perplexed about quantum physics and, oh, it can't be right, it can't be true, no, blah, 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 it doesn't, no, it can't be, because it's not logical, it can't, come on.
So Arthur Eddington, I think it was asked, how can you come to such bizarre conclusions? For example, is light a wave or a particle? So any physicist will tell you it depends. It can be both, it could be neither. It depends who measures it and when they measure it.
So light can be neither a wave nor a particle? You just said that. You said light could be either a wave or a particle or both or neither? How is light a neither? In order for light to be a neither, it has to not be a photon. And if light is not a photon, then light doesn't exist. I mean, what does this guy mean when he says that light can be neither a wave nor a particle? I just can't conceive. Maybe there is a way. I don't know. But if anybody can tell me, please make a note. Please put it in the comment of the chat.
Because in Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, without going into deep physics here, states that the velocity and position of an atom cannot be determined at the same time. And therefore, the one who measures it creates from an indeterministic state a deterministic one. Schrodinger's cat you may have heard of. I mean, many other examples that are very counter-logical. Yet, but they've been proven too many times for science to...
Is there such a phrase as counter-logical? Counter-logical. I don't think that's correct. I don't think anything is counter-logical. Maybe counterintuitive, but counter-logical. Well, I suppose yeah. No, it can be counter-logical because you say things in quantum theory, things exist in both states at the same time until you measure it. Then it becomes evident what state it's in. But that's not counter-logical, because it's logical that until you measure it, you don't know whether it's this or that. That makes sense to me. I don't understand how it's counter-logical.
Deny, and that's why it's accepted facts today. A number of years ago, there was a book called "The Most Reliable Machine on Earth is Based on the Most Unreliable Rule." Computers are the most reliable machine, and it's based on the uncertainty principle, which allows us to manipulate subatomic particles based on quantum mechanics. So he gave this analogy. How can you come to such conclusions by things you've never seen? And his analogy was with a fisherman who spread his net across the seas and gathered up all the types of fish, documented the different species, different colors, different shapes, different sizes, and then came to a master conclusion. What was that? That there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long.
Okay, you know where this is going, right? A master conclusion. The guy's a genius. The spaces in the net were half an inch, so he didn't catch any fish that were smaller than half an inch. So he concluded that there were no fish in the sea that were smaller than half an inch. This is where this is going. Dumb. Absolutely fucking dumb.
And he's ready to make an announcement. His little daughter hears he's about to make this announcement. She says to him, what does the net look like? Let's see the net that you used to capture the fish. She looked at the net, and he looks at the net. The net had spaces in the ropes that were half-inch wide and long.
Stupid.
So obviously, all the fish that were shorter than a half-inch long fell back into the water. So this great scientist was about to make a conclusion which would have been accurate, but his conclusion should have included one simple thing. If you use a net that has half-inch spaces in the ropes, you're never going to catch fish that are shorter than a half-inch long. But you don't need a scientist to know that.
This is a Bobbermeister story, a bullshit story that I've ever heard in my life.
Everyone can figure that out. His analogy was, what tools are you using? If you want to use a net with half-inch, you're going to only find fish that are longer than half-inch. If you want to experience things...
I'm still a strong atheist, no matter what Rabbi Simon Jacobson has said. He hasn't been convincing in any way, other than by being deceptive. He's not talking about the meat. He's dodging. He's not getting to the meat of the God, of his concept of God and how it's real. He's not getting there. But when he does get there, when he does try and get there, he fails miserably.
Things that you can see with the naked eye, then you'll see certain things in reality. If you want to experience something that's seen by a microscope, then you see that. you need different type of tools to experience and know subatomic particles and their movement and how they function. Which of course tells you that's something that is very in a way unsettling. Because human beings love to worship their own logic. Suddenly, your logic is not good enough. Because your logic, just like your instruments, are limited. They're limited by your logic.
So are yours, Simon. Yours and mine are limited. Okay? We have exactly the same capacity to reason. We have both have the same capacity to to learn, to be skeptical, to be commonsensical. I don't see how you believe what you're selling, because there's just no way that it's plausible, credible. It sounds to me like fakery.
So initially, it almost seems like undermining our entire processes, because then you can't rely on your logic, you can't rely on reason, you can't rely on empirical proof, you can't rely even on extrapolation. So what are you relying on? The answer is maybe you have other tools that you just have not yet accessed. Just like, let's go back to love. You know, many people who are very cerebral.
Yeah, why don't you go back to love and love that 8-day-old baby boy that you're genitally mutilating? Go and love on him for a while he's screaming in pain, defenseless, 8 days old. You should be ashamed of yourself. Your whole cult should be ashamed of itself.
And big brains have difficulty with relationships, with emotional relationships. Because they may be intellectually intelligent, but they're not emotionally intelligent. And when you tell them, you know, you're very book smart, you have no common sense. You're very brilliant, but you don't know how to emote. You don't know how to be vulnerable. And many of them will look at you and say, I don't know what you're talking about. I've tested this a number of times. What's going on? They have tools, they have their tools, and that works for them. And they have never developed the tools of emotion. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean it's not capable. It means that they're not ready to go there. So how intellectually honest is that? You're ready to go only into the meadows and the horizons that you are comfortable with.
Okay.
The first sign of intelligence is that you're ready to embrace something that may be something you're not comfortable with.
That's the first sign of intelligence? That you're ready to embrace something that you're not comfortable with? I call bullshit on that one.
If comfort is the ultimate the arbiter and decision maker in finding truth.
See, there he goes again. If comfort were the ultimate arbiter of finding truth, blah 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 blah. If, then he's gonna make a meal out of it.
And imagine what our truths are going to look like. So
I could. With comfort. What's wrong with comfort? What's wrong with striving to live a life of comfort? You know, working in the coal mines, slaving in the factories, 18 hours a day, or having a life of relative comfort. What is wrong with that? I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, what is wrong with that?
The mere fact that we talk about God, it really is challenging our tools. Because like I go back to the initial points that I made, the questions I asked were not meant just to be questions. It was meant to show that you're talking about God as if God is another reality, like let's say a sunset, or something you can observe, or
that's what it should be.
At least experience with supersensory tools. If subatomic particles can be experienced with any instrument that we know of, and you need to have different type of tools to relate to it, what about God?
Okay. I'm gonna slap this guy. Subatomic particles. If subatomic particles can't be detected and can't be seen, how do you know that they exist? Rabbi? Now, God has not ever been detected and has not ever been observed or seen, directly or indirectly. So how can you go from subatomic particles, which we know exist, and we haven't found them all, but we do know they exist? How can you make the jump from, if you can't see subatomic particles, you can't see God? That is dishonest. You are being dishonest. Dishonest Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Carry on.
And do we have the instruments to relate to a God? So let's talk about going.
Okay,
So we go.
I just want to say that he's now presupposing that God exists. Okay, do we have the instruments to relate to to understand or to feel or to? That's what he's talking about now. But he's presupposing that his God exists.
Going further and further. So far, I've said, reality can be defined by empirical tools, which is the senses. It can be defined by intellectual and emotional tools.
No. Reality is 3D. Reality is not a philosophy. Okay? Reality is reality. It's 3D, happening right now, all around you. That's what reality is.
It can be defined by extrapolation, process of elimination, and determining there must be something behind the curtain, even though I can't see it. Like I said, the invisible wall that I described. And you can keep on extrapolating. For example, if I were to ask anyone here, beyond subatomic particles, how far down the rabbit hole can we go? Are there subatomic, sub?
Yes. We know that we haven't found them all. Like we found the quark and the Higgs. We haven't found anything smaller, but we know that they are. It must be. Well, I'm not a theoretical physicist, and I don't claim to be, but I'm sure that we haven't found a particle smaller than a quark or the Higgs, but there are particles smaller. Those particular particles, the quarks and the Higgs, they break down, or certainly the quark. It breaks down into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Until it's just vibration. Nothing but vibration. Energy. That's how it all works. Rabbi, not this God nonsense.
An intelligent person today would say, I have no clue. My logic actually would dictate that it's probably an endless road. Because why should it stop? Just because I don't know, I haven't seen it. It would be like someone climbing and saying, okay, what does the horizon look like? You're standing on the ground.
God.
And you'll describe the horizon. And then someone else, okay, go up, let's say 100 to 1,000 feet up on a mountain. What does it look like now? Oh, different description. Now, go up 10,000 feet. What does it look like now? A different description. Let's say hypothetical is a mountain that goes 100,000 feet up.
Hold on, he's gone from ground, look at the horizon on the ground, to 100,000 feet, and then he goes down to 10,000 feet, and then he goes back up to 100,000 feet.
Today people landed on the moon. What did they see? Earth has a completely different look. What does all this tell you? That the more you know, the more you know how much there is more to know. And that does not minimize our knowledge. Using the words of Rabbi Yosef Albo in a book called Sefer Ikrim. It's called the Book of Foundations, the Book of Fundamentals. He says, Tachlis hayediyah shaloi neda. The ultimate of knowledge is to know that you don't know.
The ultimate of knowledge is to know that you don't know. That is crap. That's just what somebody said, Simon. The ultimate of knowledge is to know that you don't know. That's an empty statement. Proves nothing, and it doesn't convince me or anyone, I'm sure, of anything.
Now that doesn't dismiss what you know. On the contrary, it enhances it. And then there's an interpretation. The ultimate of knowledge is to know the unknowable.
Oh, please. The ultimate of knowledge is to know the unknowable. Another bullshit. This guy's got a PhD in bullshitology for sure. He's got a PhD in selling snake oil.
Whether this is an urban legend or not, I don't know. But in 1898, the word goes around. You can look it up online. There's an argument whether it ever happened or not. No one can determine. Doesn't matter. The point is this: that the U.S. patent, the head of the U.S. patent office, the U.S.
Okay, I've heard the story, and it's just so flimsy.
Head officer of the U.S. Patent Office, the one that issues patents and for inventions and so on, resigned, saying in 1898 that everything that could be invented has been invented, and there's no purpose for him to keep his job. You could close down the department. Okay. This, remember, was in the height of the Industrial Revolution. Electricity was discovered, the steam engine was discovered, the turbine was discovered. Industrialization was going full force. Most of, for example, New York's infrastructure was built 100 years ago. The subway system, the bridges. So it was pretty great feats that still stand, and we can still marvel. So it was not surprising that he came to the conclusion everything that could be invented has been invented.
Well, the guy was a fucking idiot. How does anybody come to the conclusion at any time in existence that everything that can be invented has been invented? Nothing to see here. Everything's been invented. Bullshit. Why do you think people believe what you say, Martin? Simon? I keep on calling him Martin. I don't know why. It's not a very Jewish name, is it, Simon?
Now, mind you, 1898 is pre-Einstein, pre-quantum mechanics, pre-atomic and nuclear revolution, pre-computer and information age, and pre-everything we know.
Yes, so they were idiots. They were idiots who couldn't think further than tomorrow. Like this guy who you pretend is the resigned from the patent office because there's nothing more to invent. He's trolling you, dude.
Including the internet and so on and so forth. Now, would anyone today, 10 years later, 115 years later, say, you know what, everything that could be created has been invented?
Of course.
On the contrary. With all that's happened in the last 100 years, we know that we haven't even scratched the surface. So more knowledge has taught us that there's much more that we'll ever know. Take the human body.
Thank you. I'll take it.
Box, 5-6 feet tall, 100, 200 pounds. We won't go higher than that. Sometimes a little more. And very small compared to outer space, compared even to the ocean. And yet, how much do we know about this human body? So we know much. Longevity, age expectancy is double from 1920s. I think it was 44, 45 then. Now it's almost 80. A woman a little higher. Medical breakthroughs, the elimination of diseases that killed so many. So no one argues that medicine and medical miracles are, but ask...
You know that's all science, right? Hey, Simon? All of that is science. Medical miracles, or whatever you're referring to, I don't know what that means, but everything is science. Nothing that you have mentioned have you attributed to God did it. God did it. Nothing. You're a snake oil salesman, Simon.
Ask an honest, objective, humble doctor, the best. What do we know about the human body? What do we know about the world of infertility? What about the brain? The brain, the size of the palm of my hand, a little bigger. Whatever we know, everyone knows that there's so much more that it's a complete mystery, usually.
What's a complete mystery, usually? The guy's talking shit. He's just making up, he's throwing words out there. Just to keep talking.
That doesn't mean we can't do many things, but it means that our tools that we've had till now are limited, and there are many more other tools. So now let's talk about God. Let's talk about God now.
No. We will talk about God in part 3. And I'm just going to... There we go. We'll come back in part 3. And in part 3, we will continue, and he's going to talk about God that he presupposes. And we'll pick it up, we'll feel freshened up and ready to go to battle. It's disappointing that we actually have to. But anybody out there who's still watching, Tom, John, if you're still out there, come on in and let's talk about it or something. If not, I'm going to wrap it up. And we'll do part 3 next time. Perhaps we could wait around, and I'll set a timer. Okay. We'll set the timer for about 3 minutes, and if anybody joins, then cool. And if nobody joins, then I'll just end it. Okay? Yeah, Simon. So Rabbi Simon Jacobson, part 3, hopefully the final part. But this is just a continuation of our listening to the ramblings of the dangerous ramblings, I might add, of Rabbi Simon Jacobson, who is trying to prove to atheists that God exists, but his presupposition, his axiomatically, God exists to him. So, this, when I come to talk to Rabbi Simon Jacobson, and I tell him God is impossible, God is unnecessary, and God is unevidenced, that's essentially the three, exactly the same 3 questions that I posed to Darth Dawkins if you watched part 2. Nevertheless, I think it's time for us to introduce the good rabbi. Here he is. And we can just pick up from where we left off yesterday.
The brain, the size of the palm of my hand, a little bigger. Whatever we know, everyone knows that there's so much more that it's complete mystery usually. That doesn't mean we can't do many things, but it means that our tools that we've had till now are limited, and there are many more other tools. So now let's talk about God. Let's talk about God now.
Well, I'm okay talking about God, Rabbi, if you were at least to define what this God is. Because it seems that there's a problem with definition. I have a definition of God, and you have a definition of God. And if you'd have watched yesterday's rerun or a reaction to a retro with Gary Milne, you'd see that he has a definition of God. So, without a common definition, I'm going to still insist that God is impossible. I'm still going to insist God is unnecessary. And I'm still going to insist that God is unevidenced.
I go back to the question. If all this I've said now, and this does not require any faith, does not require any belief, does not require any religion, everything I've said till now. It requires simple intelligence dictates that there's more down the rabbit hole, as I said, beneath the surface, much, much more. And if there's an unconscious, there's definitely an unconscious. And it goes on and on and on.
There's an unconscious, there's an unconscious, there's an unconscious and a non-unconscious. There's a conscious and a non and an Sorry, I'm not following him.
So then, why is it when it comes to God, are we so simplistic? And
Because you haven't defined your God yet. You haven't proven your God yet. You haven't shown any evidence. You haven't even shown that your God is necessary. You haven't shown that your God is even possible.
not applying the same type of intelligence. Here we're talking the possibility. I say possibility only because I
What an asshole this guy is.
accept it as a God, but I only say it to satisfy the objective inquiry here. So if the possibility that a God exists would mean
This is the big mistake. Because God is impossible. I've said it before. I'm going to say it again. That this guy, if he said, when he says, if there's a possibility that God exists, well, I'm taking that possibility out off the table. There's no possibility that God exists. You can't prove me wrong at all. Because he has no evidence to counter my my position of there being absolutely nothing. What he's talking about is a nothing burger. And a nothing burger is just that. There's nothing. There's nothing. There's no foundation. Nothing. But he still uses it axiomatically. He still uses that God exists axiomatically without in any way making any sense when explaining his God. He doesn't know. He doesn't know shit.
that there's a creator that put all this in place, and all this complexity, as deep as it goes, has something even deeper that when you cut to the core, you'll find that highest reality called the divine source of it all.
Oh yeah. Now this is something that he's just claiming. That is a huge major claim on your part, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. You got any backup for that? Anything at all? Because what you're talking about now is it sounds like you're just pulling it out of thin air. Divine. You haven't divine. Where do we get divine from? What does it even mean? Without defining your God. You haven't done that once yet.
That's so illogical. I don't find that illogical at all.
Well, I do. There's no possibility that a God exists. And not every scientist is going to say, well, maybe a God exists. You're gaslighting. You're lying. And that really annoys me.
I mean, even people who don't have belief in faith took some psychedelics, and they all came back with the same conclusion, that there's some higher force behind it all.
Okay, so without psychedelics, there's no God. No higher force, no nothing. But with psychedelics, all of a sudden there's a God. This is his best argument. This is Rabbi Simon Jacobson's argument, that people who did not have God, once they took psychedelics, they discovered God. This is Rabbi Simon Jacobson's finest argument for God. Man, that's weak. Simon, weak.
You know how many people came to believe in God because of LSD? Or because of some...
And that's something to promote? Are you out of your mind, dude?
other hallucinogens and other psychedelic experiences? I'm not suggesting that's a proof, but I'm suggesting...
Well, then what is it? Okay, if it's not a proof, it's a...
If hundreds or thousands and thousands of people came to realize, what they come to realize, that which any logic can tell you, that there's a lot more going on beneath this, behind the scenes. As a matter of...
Behind the scenes of what? What do you mean there's a lot more going on behind the scenes? You're just sort of just circling. You never get to the point. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes. That's uninformative.
In fact, that's far more real than what we see.
It's uninformative, sorry. A lot more going on behind the scenes that we see. I mean, I don't buy it. I don't see why anybody else would buy it, because you're not providing any detail. You're just making a absurd claim.
So if I were to ask you now a question, I started out the process of elimination, working our way from the bottom up, what we see with our eyes. Now that we know what we know scientifically, and I'm not even discussing God for a moment, what is more real, the subatomic particles that shape everything in existence, or the objects that we see with our eyes? I'll put it this way, the DNA in your body, or the physical body that you have that you see in the mirror?
That's the stupid question. And he's one of the highlights of stupid questions of the century. Your DNA in your body and you.
The answer is obvious. What you see is just the surface level.
What you see in the mirror is the surface level, but inside your DNA, there's information which you don't see. Well, that's bullshit, because if you don't see it, we wouldn't know it was there. And sure, you can't see it with your naked eye, duh, but you can see it through a microscope or whatever instrument they use to see or determine the makeup of the DNA. I don't know what it is, but you still haven't got anywhere close to convincing anybody that your God, or that a God, can even possibly exist. There's no reason yet that you've given for a God to exist when we've both acknowledged that reality exists, but you are saying that God exists on the same plane as reality, outside of reality, but on the same plane. And somehow your God can communicate with you. This God is so big, that this universe, remember, the cosmos is it's so unimaginably massive that you still think that you can throw a conscious, intelligent mind outside of, with no form, hanging around outside of the cosmos, directing its attention at you. Absolute gobbledygook. Simon, when are you going to... You've been doing this for, I'm sure, a very long time. Have you been talking the same nonsense for maybe 30 years? Seriously? And people listen to you? Well, I'm listening to you, but man, I'm reacting. Not just listening. You won't let anybody react in your lecture there, which is fine. But I'm reacting now.
Tip of the iceberg. Just because you're comfortable with it and you see it all the time doesn't mean that it's the most real aspect. It's like saying, what's more real, the symptom or the cause? The symptom you see. Someone said, I have a toothache, I have a headache. Yeah, obviously you feel it and you know it's very real. But what is real? The toothache or what's causing the toothache to take? And the cause is always invisible.
That's such crap. If you've got a toothache, you probably have a cavity. A cavity that just doesn't happen overnight. I'm sure it takes time for a cavity to get large enough for you to feel it, for it to hurt. So this guy is missing everything. He's I think he's wearing sort of opaque glasses. His cult does not allow him to see reality for what it really is. That's what I'm speculating here.
Well, not always, most of the time. So what you conclude from this is a very interesting reverse hypothesis, and that is that the more visible it is, maybe the less real it is, and the more invisible it is.
The more visible it is, the less real it is. And the more invisible it is,
the more real it is.
The more real it is. Okay, let's try let's try and understand this. The more visible it is, the less real it is. The more invisible it is, the more real it is. Can we break down logically what this means? No, we can't. It's garbage. It's gibberish. It's word salad. Nonsense. Simon, Simon, Simon.
So reality is not defined by us.
Of course not. Reality is reality. You don't have to define reality. Reality is what is. That's the definition. That's the definition. Reality is what it is. There's no definition for it, other than reality is what it is.
Defined by the causes that shape us. And we know clearly that everything in existence has causes. That's the whole basis of science. So even though no one's ever seen gravity, but you see the impact of gravity. So clearly gravity...
Right. Okay. Let's stop right there. We've never seen gravity, but we've seen the impact of gravity. We've never seen God, but we've never seen the impact of God either. Right? So if you could say we've never seen God, but we've seen the impact of God, and you can come up with something convincing, then maybe you've got something to put on the table. But right now, it's I've never seen God, and I have never seen any evidence for God. That's what you're saying. Well, that's what we all know. I mean, it's not even debatable.
Gravity is a force. Electromagnetism, the other two, nuclear strong force, the weak force. These are energies you've never seen.
Bullshit. They've been measured. What do you mean they've never seen? Are you setting a criterion that only things that can be seen with the visible light in the visible light spectrum exist, and everything else, like electromagnetism, which cannot be seen with the naked eye, but can be evidenced? I don't understand what the difference is. It's real. Electromagnetism is real, right? And the light and the light coming on when you switch on the electric circuit is real. You can see it. You can't see the electricity, but you can see the effects of the electricity. So yeah, they're both real. This man, Simon, he's talking, he's lying to you. Look, he's lying. He's looking right at you, and he's lying. Although he's got these shifty eyes, which kind of give it away that he is lying. And it's not his fault, okay? Because when he was learning these stories, he was learning them from a man who looks very similar to him and who acted very similar to the way he's acting now. So he had many years to watch how these stories are told, and he's had many years to understand the shifty eye because it is just a business, and the shifty eye is a projection that he knows is just spinning a yarn, as it were, but spinning a yarn deceptively because he wants you to believe it as being true. And he's still trying to somehow crowbar his God into the conversation. But to no avail, there's no definition.
Have you ever seen electricity?
Oh,
You sure know it exists. You touch, God forbid, a live wire, you're going to feel it. You look at appliances, you look at the world lit up, alive, energized, something's energizing it. But what does electricity look like?
So it's real. It's energizing it, so it's real. It's energy. Because energy is all that there is.
Can you tell me? I know the images we have looks like lightning bolts. We envision it as some type of flow, but it's not subject to the senses. But it's undeniable, and we can generate it, and we can regulate it, and we can control it.
So it is real. Hello?
Where does water come from? You ever think about water? So we know the water that comes into our houses do not originate in the pipes.
He must think that everybody was just like born yesterday and they know absolutely nothing, and they come into his lectures and to be educated about everything. So just imagine somebody walking in here and relying on this guy for basic general knowledge. And here he's talking about he never actually comes to make a point. He always thinks he's getting closer. He says he's going to get closer, and then he moves on to something else. Because the electricity he just spoke about, he said something about you don't see electricity, but you see the appliances and water. What about water? You know, let me just shut up.
Obviously.
Sorry.
Right? They originate, the pipes are pumping water from arteries, water mains that lie under the ground, right? Where do those water mains lead you? To reservoirs that can be hundreds of miles away. New York's reservoirs are hundreds of miles from here. They gather water through rainwater and other sources, okay? Mm-hmm. But where does the water come from? Where does rainwater come from? Okay, so rainwater can be traced to the seas, to the evaporation that creates the clouds, etc., etc. And where do the seas get their water from? So that goes back to deep under the ground of the seas. You have the sources of springs, live springs, that come from the center of the earth, which, by the way, is complete fire and lava, everything antithetical to water. Can you explain how the belly of the earth, which is heat that's comparable to the heat of the sun, and creating volcanic eruptions,
it's molten iron, isn't it?
Water to come when water is. So the answer is that once it cools off, the lava turns into water, whatever, all the different theories. But how many of us have even traced it all the way back to the source? You know, we trace it. We know, we're pretty happy if you get water.
Traced what back to the source? Traced water back to the source? Hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen has been around since almost the beginning. And oxygen, well, has been around for a very long time. So what source are you talking about? Which particular supernova are you referring to, Simon?
Bottled water or water coming out of your faucet, with a filter, no filter, that's about it. I'm just trying to point out how we are really very superficial people. And I include myself. We worship what we see. We're seduced by our senses. You can hear every truth in the world, and you're standing outside, and a beautiful woman walks by, or another sight, you will be attracted by it. It doesn't matter what you're thinking about.
So, what's your point? So fucking what? You can just as easily refocus from what you were distracted by as focusing on the distraction, but you could just very easily refocus. So what is your point when you say you get distracted? So you get distracted. In fact, if you were really, 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 really focused, you wouldn't get distracted. So don't bullshit and say that you're focused.
Because we are people of senses. We are sensory creatures who value what we see, what we hear, we taste, touch, and smell. We would not have a $1 trillion advertising industry or $1 billion advertising industry and everyone vying for our attention in one way or another if it didn't have power. We're hip.
So fucking what? This is marketing. This guy himself, he's such a fucking hypocrite. He's marketing his nonsense here in this lecture. Listen to him. Listen to all the crap he talks. Listen to all the gobbledygook he spews. And then he talks about how marketing works. In the material world, of course, not in his spiritual world. Yeah, no, different.
Hypnotized by this world. Let's be honest. So
no, I'm not hypnotized by this world. Are you? Let's be honest. I'm not hypnotized by this world, and I'm being honest. What are you talking about, Simon? Rabbi Simon?
of things and the sources of things may intrigue us. You know, everybody wants to know what makes a clock tick. We all like to take things apart, but with a limit. So the search for God is actually the greatest search on history because you're searching for the root of it all.
The search for God is the greatest search in history because you're searching for the root of it all. You see? He's already presupposing that God exists and God is the root, and he hasn't come up with anything that backs it up. Anything other than his specious claim.
And the people who seriously searched for it, starting from Abraham, they never stopped.
Why start from Abraham? That doesn't make sense. If you're going to search for God, God was around before Abraham. We don't need Abraham. We don't even need any text. Because if God actually exists, and you can only know about the existence of God through human text, then I would get very suspicious about what you're saying. I would question your credibility and your honesty, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Because now you're gaslighting, or you're what's a good word? You're non sequitoring.
This is what I describe now at length is basically Abraham's journey. He grew up in a home, a pagan home.
Abraham's journey. Who's Abraham? Why don't you tell us who Abraham is and why he's significant? Who cares about Abraham? Who gives a shit about Abraham? And besides, who was following him around with a pen and paper and taking notes on his journey? That's a problem with all of these stories. They never account for who actually writes the story down or gets it down in some kind of print so that we can preserve it. He never talks about that. He'll just talk about this, I don't know, mythical Abraham.
In a pagan world. You know what they worship? They worship.
Abraham's parents. Now whoever Abraham is, his parents are pagan. Did you see how angry he looks at when he says pagan? Now in a pagan world, what?
Worshipped idols.
Oh, they worshipped idols. I'm so glad I was sitting down. That is horrible news. Pagans worshipped idols? Are you kidding me? Whew. Rabbi, tell us more.
They worshipped gods that they could see. Maimonides has a fascinating introduction to the laws of idolatry in his book Mishnah Torah that describes how did people become idol worshippers.
Laws of idolatry? It's just, you can't make this up, man. Laws of idolatry.
And his answer, the way he explains it is brilliant. It's fascinating. That initially Adam and Eve knew there was some invisible force, reality that put everything here.
And they knew that how? Because they're intelligent and they questioned everything. They sat over the kitchen table at dinner or after dinner, and they discussed where they came from.
But then human beings felt uncomfortable with looking for invisible because we want something visible. So they began to attribute to stars. That's why it's called star worship. Because stars, they didn't say stars are God. They said stars are God's handiwork. They're God's instruments.
And so they worship them. So then why don't you worship the planet Earth, if that's the case? Why don't you worship the sun? If that's God's handiwork, is the sun, which is what gives you energy, which is what gives you life, why don't you worship the sun? You don't even have to make an idol of the sun. You can just worship the sun. It's there. God, why do you make things so complicated, Rabbi Simon Jacobson and his cult.
And they began to identify with stars. But stars are very far away. So they
There's one star that's a lot closer than the others. Just saying.
began to identify with trees and objects on Earth.
Okay, so he's saying that stars are very far away, so praying to them was it's God's work. It's God's work, but praying to them was somehow ineffective. So they turned to trees and something on Earth. Let's hear.
That they said correspond to different constellations and stars. And then came the next level of the...
So trees and natural things that correspond to constellations of stars.
The what do we call the con artists and the
And then the con artists are the charlatans. I think he's talking about religion here.
charlatans who said, you know what, people are worshiping that. Let's create a building around certain trees and around certain objects, and we'll sell entrance fee. We'll make...
So you take a god, you build a building around it, and you charge people to come in and worship the god. Huh. Not a bad business. It's like the mega church of today. You know, God is, or the worshipper, the thing, the idol is Joel Osteen, and the building is the mega church, and you get charged entrance fee. That's what he's talking about, isn't he? Seems to work in America.
Make some money on it. And here, slowly, generation by generation, evolved. Instead of accepting that the source of it all is invisible and beyond you, we want to...
Did you hear that? Instead of accepting that the invisible, the source of everything is invisible and beyond you, you have to accept that. That the source of everything is invisible and beyond you. I don't see how that makes any... Why should I accept that? I think that's the basis, the ground level, the entry level axiom or foundation that you have to accept when you enter this man's cult.
have a god or some type of deity that we can relate to. A tree.
A god or some type of deity, a tree.
A sun, a moon.
A sun! You said it. There's your God. If you truly were honest, you would worship the star that God created and that gives you life. That's if you were honest and you really, really wanted to worship what was important. You wouldn't have to make up a story about how the star got there. All you have to do is read a science book, watch Neil deGrasse Tyson, watch astrophysicists like Dr. Becky or Lawrence Krauss. Actually, he's a theoretical physicist.
Other objects. So it didn't begin foolishly, someone's going to just bow down to a stone or to a tree. These became symbols of God's hand. But then the symbols became God, and God was forgotten. Comes Abraham, in his intelligence, even as a child, recognizes there's no way that all these objects, which are just like me and you, and they're mortal, and they will die, and they're subject to all the erosion and the effects of a mortal universe, can be the source of it all. Like I said earlier, the world does not dictate that it's a source. So he came to start extrapolating. So where is it? He went out to the meadows, looked up to the heavens. First he said the sun, the moon. No, but the sun and moon are just extension of this universe.
Well, it's totally getting fucking boring. So I want to reach out and recognize you guys in the chat. Paul, Tyler. How you guys doing? Thank you for hanging in with us, with me. I think this guy's full of bullshit. What do you think? He calls himself rabbi, which is kind of an insult. In my opinion, I would hate to be referred to as rabbi. It's like I feel, just like I felt all my life about rabbis, they lie. They're selling snake oil. The whole story, the whole everything about what they say is nonsense, and they never tie it up to convincing me and anyone else that I know who thinks like me. They never convince us that their God is even possible, never mind actually exists.
The sun sets, the moon sets. He realized they're all the same, limited. And then he came to...
They're all the same, limited. What do you mean? They all do, they do what they do. That's reality. No matter what you think, no matter what you believe, Simon, reality still continues without your conceptions, ideas.
The big realization that took him many years to come to realize. That's the other way around. He's looking for God. He's looking for God on his terms. He realized he has to...
Of course he is. Why not? Who do you think? Firstly, God doesn't exist. So of course he's going to look for God on his terms. Whose terms is he going to look at? Whose terms is he going to look after God? On whose terms? If not his own. That's a stupid thing to say. Another stupid Simon statement. Damn.
So stop looking. Shut down all your senses and God will emerge. That's what he came to realize.
Shut down all your senses and God will emerge. That's what he came to realize. What clown is he even talking about? And it was so important to this Simon guy that he's got to repeat that silly story in a lecture to adults. I think they're adults. I'm sure they're adults. I don't think kids would last 5 minutes listening to this guy. They'd fall asleep or just run away.
Because as I said earlier, the part cannot dictate what the whole is like. How could a creature discover the creator?
Right, which is what you are. You're a creature. How can you discover your creator? You've just admitted that you have absolutely no idea about whether the creator exists, because you're just a creature. You can't discover your creator, so you're just guessing that you were created, right? Right, Simon? Even though every single atom inside your body was created in a star, in a supernova, in an explosion, the likes of which you can't even imagine. It was so hot. It was so hot that the lighter elements like helium and hydrogen, it was so hot that the heavy elements, I should say, were able to be put together and emerge from that heat source. That's how it works. That's all you are, Simon. You're just a whole bunch of atoms, and the atoms inside of you will exist eternally. What do you think of that? Isn't that mind-blowing? The atoms inside of you have existed eternally, and when they break down when your body breaks down and all the atoms become free, they still will exist. So, question for you, Simon, Rabbi Simon, is: does anything ever die? Is there really such a thing as death? Philosophical death, yeah, but is there really physical death? I don't think so.
You can extrapolate, you can figure out there must be something, but how could you relate to the Creator? only by shutting down his own tools. So think.
Yeah, exactly. You can only relate to a creator if you shut down your faculties of reason, your shut down your system of logic and of critical thinking. Yeah, shut them all down. You can come to a creator. Promise you can. And I'll back this guy up.
Think of this way: shut down your senses.
Shut down your senses.
Your sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. What do you
Right. So yeah, it's dark. You can't see, you can't taste or smell or anything. It's just like dark. And then
what are you going to be left with? So initially, the thought may be daunting, may be frightening. You think you disappear. You won't disappear. You'll be left with yourself. That's not shaped by and.
It's no different than being at night in a very quiet, dark bedroom where it's very silent and there's no light. You're lying there and you're with yourself.
And defined by senses. When's the last time you tried that? Try it out.
Then what?
No, you can't try it out right now because you need to. Because if you want to hear what I'm going to say, you can't shut your sound. But try it out. Just a total silence where you have all your senses shut down, if possible. You're going to start hearing yourself, a voice within. Abraham came to realize if he wants to.
What a charlatan this guy is. He's telling you that if you shut down all your senses, you're going to start hearing a voice within yourself. And then he jumps into Abraham, the story of Abraham, where I guess Abraham heard a voice within himself. Tell me if I'm wrong. Let's do it.
To find God, he has to allow God to find him. He has to shut down, which we call humility, complete silence. Instead of aggressively trying to find God like we find other things in life, like finding a loaf of bread or finding an answer to our problem.
Aggressively finding other things in life, like finding a loaf of bread. It's aggressive. Is that an aggressive thing to do? Find a loaf of bread? How many of you out there have aggressively found a loaf of bread? Anyone? Whoa. A lot more than I expected. Just kidding.
Realize, let me shut everything down, and the essence of it all, the core of it all will emerge. And that's when he first discovered God. Or you could say...
So he shut everything down, and he heard voices, and he discovered God. That's a very familiar story, isn't it?
God discovered him. And that was the relationship. So what are we talking about now? What kind of entity is this?
It's an imaginary entity. It's a conceptual entity, and it is an idea. That's it.
You can't use human tools to define the entity.
Now you can't use human tools even though he's a human. I wonder what he's going to come up with that's possible to use as a human.
Entity called the divine, but we could extrapolate. And we can shut down our tools and then discover realities that we never thought are possible. Actually, quantum mechanics is a very good example for this type of stuff. Because it's when you shut down your conventional logical tools is when you come to realize there are other type of realities that you would not have seen otherwise. So it comes down to this using...
Hey, Tom. Welcome to the chat room. You guys are all free to... Oh shit, I didn't even put the, my bad. I didn't put the link. I'll stick it in there right now. You're all welcome to join in the room and make fun of this guy as well. Or comment on what he's saying. I'm finding what he's saying pretty damn offensive. Hold on a sec, I just want to pin this. Alright, there you go. Let's carry on.
Now, the Maimonides term, he says God. Well, before I go there, let me just say the following. So Richard Dawkins and the other atheists, Their big statement, everyone always asks like this. Okay, you say nothing can create itself. Fine. That means there's a God that created everything. If nothing can create itself, then who created God? That's the next question they always ask. So everything has a cause, fine. We have parents, our parents had parents. Everything in this world evolved from one state of being, another state of being, another state of being. But then who created the first state of being? God? So who created God? You just said nothing can create itself. This is the brilliant argument of atheists. Now, if you think about it,
he hasn't stated an argument. He said atheists ask questions. Who created God? That is the okay. Or maybe I'm not. Maybe there's a brilliant argument coming up right now.
for a few minutes, you realize that the response is very obvious. Obviously, if you're just carrying over the question from objects to God, and God is just another extension of us, of course, then the question is, who created God? But the real conclusion, this is what Abraham came to, and now I'm using Maimonides' words, is that God is a reality in existence that's like none other.
Ha 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 ha. God is a reality in an existence like none other. Just accept that, okay? Because it's true. Yeah, you got to accept that. You know, I'm a very credible person. I have a rabbi. I have the word rabbi before my name. This is absurd. This is almost medieval talk. This is the way they used to teach medieval people. They used to talk nonsense to them, and the kids used to, and the audience used to say, he looks like he's got a beard, so he must be a bushy beard. He must be a very intelligent guy. And they actually believe this nonsense.
If God is an existence like ours, then obviously something has...
You see, if God, if, he's everything about his whole spiel, his whole shtick is if.
...to create it as well, because nothing can exist on its own. And therefore you have the expressions, three main expressions that describe as best as possible. The one is Maimonides' words, that God is a bilti mitzias nimtza, which means a non-existential existence.
God is a non-existential existence. See, they're making up statements and phrases that, although they sound, highfalutin, with all these big words, they mean absolutely nothing. They can't. The whole phrase implodes on itself.
Let me explain. It means you cannot say God exists, because then you would suggest that God exists like we exist. You can't say God does not exist, so you say God exists, but not in an existence that we can even conceive of.
That's so stupid. I'd just like to recognize Christ brings a sword. Welcome. Can a computer understand a human? How can a creation understand the creator? Well, there's no creator. A creator doesn't exist. A creator is impossible. So we discount a creator in real life. Okay, we're listening to this guy's lies and gaslightings, but we all know that a creator or God is just a concept. It's impossible in reality for there to be a creator. We all know that, but this guy seems to want to push it. I think it's his job. I think he relies on it for his paycheck.
So we exist because we manifest in certain ways. Like I said earlier, if I told you that there's a white wall right here, all you need to do is come and look at it. What happens if I told you there's a white wall outside? You have to believe it's true. Maybe it's not. You would need...
It doesn't matter. It's possible. This is where I think these guys get everything wrong. If you say to me, like he just said, if there's a white wall outside, if I told you there was a white wall outside, you'd have to come and look to see if it's a white wall outside, or you just have to believe that that there's a white wall outside. What I said, and which is fine. Either way, doesn't matter, because it is possible for there to be a white wall outside. Okay, it's possible. God is impossible. So for him to invoke something that is impossible and then compare it to the to a possibility that a God exists under the same conditions, using the same rules, is disingenuous. You can't do that. You can't say, well, I'm going to tell you something and just believe it. When it comes to materialism, versus I'm going to tell you something and I want you to just believe it when it comes to gobbledygook. They're two different animals. Well, one's an animal and one's a non-existent nothing.
Need proof for it to exist. A non-existential existence doesn't need proof, because proof itself is created by that non-existential existence. So in other words,
non-existential existence, that makes no sense. Non-existential existence. I'm going to write that down in the chat there. Existential existence. What does this mean? Guess I should learn to type, huh? Here we go. Non-existential existence. What does this mean? There we go.
what we can extrapolate is that a creator would be nothing like we are.
That's right. Because we exist. This guy is he's digging himself a huge hole. He's falling right into it. Can you believe it? I mean, he doesn't see it. Hello, CCK. But this guy doesn't see it at all. He's digging himself a deeper and deeper and deeper hole.
So anything we're subject to, which includes having a cause, means the creator would have no cause.
No! Wrong! That's a ridiculous conclusion. I want you to listen to that again.
So we exist because we manifest in certain ways. Like I said earlier, if I told you that there's a white wall right here, all you need to do is come and look at it. What happens if I told you there's a white wall outside? You have to believe it's true. Maybe it's not.
Doesn't matter.
You would need proof for it to exist. A non-existential existence doesn't need proof.
A non-existential existence doesn't need proof. Rabbi, a non-existential existence doesn't need proof. Explain me. Explain me, baby. Non-existential existence doesn't need proof. Garbage, gibberish, gobbledygook.
Because proof itself is created by that non-existential existence. So in other
Proof itself is created by that non-existential existence. Is anybody listening to what this guy says? And how much nonsense it is?
In other words, what we can extrapolate is that a creator would be nothing like we are. So anything we're
Again, of course, because we exist and a creator does not exist. So he's right there.
subject to, which includes having a cause, means the creator would have no cause. Or as another expression that's used, mitziyuse matzmuse.
The creator would have no cause. Just throw it out there. Okay. Listen, Mr. Smarty Pants. I know you're a critical thinker, and I know that, and this is for all of you viewers out there. I'm addressing you. I know you're a critical thinker. I know you rely on reason and being rational, logical, and using your common sense. But the Creator doesn't have to be created. That's all you need to know.
His cause is himself. He causes his own existence.
A creator doesn't have to be created because he causes his own existence. Okay, so if you cause your own existence, then there has to be a time in order for that cause of existence to be to proceed. There has to be a time when you don't exist. So you don't exist, and then you cause your own existence. Is that how it works? So there's a period before you cause your own existence that there's nothing, there's no existence. Is this what you're trying to peddle here, Mr. Snake Oil Salesman?
His existence is a result of his being. By us, it's the other way around. Our being is a result of our existence. His existence is a result of his reality. So what does that reality mean? It means it's real, not because it's provable, not because it's witnessed. It's real because it's real.
It's real because it's real. It's not because it's witnessed, not because it's there's proof. It's real because it's real. See? Now, if that is isn't circular argument, or if that isn't a circular statement, then I don't know what is. Rabbi Simon Jacobson says it's real because it's real. God is real because God is real. That's it. Accept it. You have to accept it because there's no other choice, according to this rabbi.
Or to use the word that God said to Moses when he asked him, tell me your name, he said, Eya asher Eya, I am who I am, which of course is cryptic. What does that mean?
Actually, it's not cryptic. I am who I am. We all say that. I am. I think. I think, therefore I am. That's the same thing. I know I exist. And why he talks about Moses, who's a myth, on some mountain, from a fantasy literature piece of writing, is beyond me. He already loses credibility when he starts to quote from scripture, from man-made stuff. He loses all credibility with me.
Maimonides defines it means I am because I am. Nothing is because it is. Everything is because something put it there. So in effect, what we discover is that the truth is you cannot say God exists, because exists is meant in terms, when we say exists, it means.
Did you hear that? The truth is, he says, you cannot say that God exists. Okay, Gary Milne, I would like to introduce you to Rabbi Simon Jacobson. And Gary Milne says that God exists, and Rabbi Simon Jacobson says you cannot say that God exists.
Either empirical existence, extrapolated existence, perceived existence due to common experience, or the other ways I described earlier, some tool. An existence that just exists because it's real is not something that is in our scope. But we can extrapolate and we can figure.
He talked crap. It's beyond our scope, but we can extrapolate. If it's beyond your scope, how are you going to extrapolate if it's beyond your scope? That is just nonsense talk.
Figure it out by saying, since we exist and our existence must be dependent on something, then
the sun. See? Like I said before, worship the sun and everything will be cool, because at least you'll be worshipping the source of your life, just like you should be.
The one who
And I might add, the sun is not an idol. The sun is there. It's right there. It's a real thing.
put it here must be existence that's not dependent on anything. And in that process, you can learn a lot about what God is like.
No. You still haven't said one word about what God is like. Not a damn thing.
And above all, is because that type of non-existential existence actually embedded within us different elements that we can also sense it. I'm going to give you an example. I don't know if everyone's following. Maybe I'm going over my own head and over everybody's head here, but let me say this. You know,
he knows he's talking shit. That's why he said that.
we value consciousness a lot. You know, if someone says, I'm conscious of something, I'm aware of something, it's considered a compliment, right? Whereas if someone says, I'm not aware, or the person is unaware or clueless, it's usually not a compliment. But I'm going to try to suggest that consciousness is actually not a positive, it's a negative. When you're conscious of something, it suggests duality. There's you and the thing you're conscious of. True experience is one that is so seamless and so much in the zone that you're not conscious that it's happening. And I'll give an example. Here. What is your left foot doing right now? So until I mentioned that, you weren't even thinking about it. You weren't conscious of it, but it was alive and it was functioning. Now that you're thinking about your left foot, does that make it more real? Or on the contrary, it makes it less real? Because let's say, what does health feel like? Someone says,
okay, now I'm sorry, I just got to interrupt you. This guy is really talking nonsense. What is the left foot got to do with anything? The left foot is not God. The left foot is living, even though you're not conscious of it, whatever it's doing. It's there, it's still alive. And when you concentrate on your left foot, oh yeah, but then you don't concentrate on your right hand. So what is your point, Simon? And when you concentrate on your left foot, what about your right foot? Do you just not concentrate on that? Do you just say, well, I'm not quite sure what I'm trying to say here, but it's annoying when he says, well, let me try and get out what I'm trying to say. He says, until I said this, you're not conscious of your left foot. Your left foot was just there, you weren't conscious of it. But that's not true, because you're always subconsciously aware of everything. Okay? Your foot is gonna react to a sharp jolt or a sharp or fire or heat, extreme heat. All of a sudden, your foot's gonna react and you're not even gonna know about it. So you got it all wrong, Rabbi. You go back to school, go back to kindergarten and start all over again. And don't go to that same cult kindergarten that you're now a big lecturer of in this cult. Go back to secular kindergarten and educate yourself with critical thinking, with common sense, with reason and logic. And you won't find yourself in a bind where you have to defend a non-existent God or creator and make these silly statements about how about let me just go back up here. About a non-existential existence doesn't need proof. That's what you said. And that's idiotic.
It says, what does it feel like to be healthy? If you could describe what it feels like, you probably need a doctor. Because health is not supposed to feel like anything. You know, it's not supposed to feel the blood rushing through your veins and arteries. Your heart shouldn't be felt. Health is a silent, a real healthy person is a seamless, silent experience. So sensation And consciousness is actually a little superimposed. Do you think, for example, you put a dry hand in water, so the dry hand gets wet. But does wetness get wet? Wetness is wet.
Silly, stupid. Wetness is wet. And this has got nothing to do with God. How does he convince me that his God exists somewhere by claiming that wetness is wet? You put your hand in the water, your hand gets wet, but is wetness wet? It's dumb. It's absurd. Who pays this guy for this nonsense?
So when we learn knowledge, we learn information. So before I was ignorant, now I'm aware of something. That alone indicates a type of superimposed experience. But when someone becomes completely integrated with knowledge, you become the knowledge itself. I don't know
Bullshit.
if any of you have ever experienced what's called being in the zone. As a writer, I can tell you, and this athletes tell this to you, that there's being in the zone. What's in the zone? That you're so immersed in what you're doing, you don't realize that you're doing it. You completely forget about yourself. You don't realize what time it is. You don't realize if you're hungry or tired. You're just like a channel. Everybody vies for that type of state. Doesn't always come. You'll hear it especially with experienced athletes. You've ever seen, for example, let's say the bottom of the ninth in a baseball game of the seventh game of the World Series, or the final points in a championship tennis match. Even watching it, your hands tremble. Imagine the person who's playing. How can they have that composure? Because years and years of conditioning and training prepare you for the moment that when you're in that type of state and you have the experience.
And years of conditioning and indoctrination has conditioned Rabbi Simon Jacobson to sit here and spew the pseudo philosophical nonsense that he's come up with in regards to proving that his God exists. In fact, he pretty much says God exists because God exists, and you pretty much have to. No, he said God is because God is, something like that. I mean, that's his best argument so far, and it's unconvincing.
You just get into that zone and you don't even feel what you're doing. Obviously, you're working with everything, all your instincts, but that is considered to be the most powerful experience in life. Love is that way, right? The deepest levels of sexual or love ecstasy is where you lose yourself and you lose your identity. Why? Because
what do you mean you lose your... Whoa. You lose your identity when you're having sex? It's part of your identity, Rabbi. Your sexuality is part of your identity. No? You don't believe me? Well, you certainly don't seem to believe me, because this is now the second or third time that you've mentioned sex in a very, very, very negative way.
The subject and the object melt into one. So Jewish thought, when it talks about, for example, Chet Eitzadas, the tree of knowledge. What happened when they ate from the tree of knowledge? They became conscious of themselves. Self-conscious.
Oh, by the way, he's quoting a book of fiction, just to let you know. I know these things.
Was born. Imagine a life where you're not self-conscious. Newborn children, young children, they're not conscious, not of their sexuality, not of themselves.
See?
There it
goes again.
To just be. Not to do, but just be. A state of being. That type of being comfortable in your own skin, where instead of doing or acquiring, instead of a verb, you're like a noun, is the ultimate experience. Why am I saying this? Because this is a little taste of what the reality of what God is like. Everything in this world that we have is always, I'm reaching to this, I'm trying to find out that. You're trying to discover things. But there's a reality where it does not have necessarily any shape or form and not even a feeling. There's no sensation when you're in that type of zone. Like I said, When your body is alive, even if you're not conscious of what your left leg or right leg is doing, it's there. Who says consciousness is what defines things? This, in a way, is an expression, an experience that is somewhat of the way the divine essence works. It's not defined by experiences, it's defined by being. It's the ultimate state of being.
Silly claim, an ultimate state of being. What does that even mean? How can you explain that? How can you convince me of what you say, Rabbi Simon? Because you are failing.
Now, I know some of what I'm saying may be abstract or complex, or maybe it sounds gibberish to you, but I'm just trying to give a taste of some of the discussions, some of the more complicated discussions.
He acknowledges that he's talking gibberish, at least.
About the nature of God, quote unquote nature. Really coming to realize that the opportunity to meet God, the opportunity to understand what God is like, is really an opportunity to get beyond our limited horizons and come to realize that a reality that defines this reality is very, very different than ours.
Again, something that doesn't make any sense at all. It's word salad. He's talking about a reality that we live in, and then he's talking about a reality that God lives in. And he doesn't know what he's talking. How can he know these things? He's just not talking nonsense, because he's probably been taught these things, through generations and generations, going back generations and generations and generations, and so that's the lifestyle that these guys lead, these cultists lead. They spread the lie from generation to generation to generation to generation. Just like that's what's happening here. He's expecting people to hold on to what he says and accept it as the truth when he says, God is God. God is God because God is God. God is real because he's real. That kind of thing. I think it's time that all this nonsense comes to an end globally. Just saying.
And in effect, when a person comes to that, they come to embrace truths and eternity that is very different than what our lives are like. Our lives, as I said, are defined by our experiences, by what we see, we hear, taste, touch, and smell, our needs, the perceived things we consider to give us value, and that's through acquiring things, wealth, possessions, and so on. In truth, reality is just the fact that you are. It doesn't require anything. It's just the peace, to be at peace that you are. This is a divine reality.
No, it's not. Bullshit. It's just reality. When you stick the word divine in there, you are giving yourself away as a charlatan. Because divine means absolutely nothing. Divine. You've not once. You've introduced the word, I will say that, but not once have you given some kind of clue as to what you mean when you say divine. Because divine, to me, is a word like, Christmas or Easter or resurrection, or just a stupid shit. Stupid shit, man.
But we are a created reality, and as a created reality,
we are not a created reality. That's a claim that you're making that is a lie, an absolute specious, vacuous statement, a lie, to put it bluntly.
Everything is shaped and defined by limited experiences. So in a sense,
that's bullshit. Everything is shaped and defined by limited experiences. Do you believe that? Do you buy that? I don't.
In a strange way, when an atheist says, I don't believe that God exists, or God does not exist.
I'm an atheist. God does not exist. If anybody else watching live agrees with me, push 1. God does not exist. Push 1 in the chat. And then I'll carry on. There's only 2 people watching, so I should get at least one. No one's. All right, let's just move on. Hey, Tyler, thank you.
Should say, in a way, the atheist is truer than the believer that says God exists. Because when you say God exists, you're saying a God that exists on your terms. What we call existence, just like this table exists, God exists on a more sublime level. When someone says God does not exist, even though they may not mean that, but what they're really saying is that God does not exist the way we exist.
No. We are saying God does not exist, period. Okay? You got to get this through your head, Simon, that atheists aren't just denying the real existence of God. Atheists are telling you that God does not exist. Move on with your lives. Tell your cult to take a different turn, take a different tact. Change your mission statement. Make it work for something good. But you spreading all this nonsense over and over and over again is not doing anybody any good except for your cult. Because it's a business.
Now, I believe that if you're able to define God in new ways, like Levi Yitzchak Berditchever said, if you define God not in the way that was usually defined, like most people's knee-jerk and immediate reaction is a juvenile image of God. What is God? God is like this man sitting on a big throne in heaven with a long white beard or no beard, whatever, and strikes us with lightning when we misbehave. You know, this is the God most people accept. Some type of like God that punishes, the judge, the one who watches everything. You know, this is the God that we're taught in many religious schools and environments. That is a very juvenile God, and such a God, maybe Levi Yitzchak Berditchever and other believers would say, if that's the God you believe in, I also am an atheist. So when a person says they're an atheist or agnostic, it could very well be the God that they grew up with, they don't believe it. When Nietzsche said God is dead, and the joke goes, Nietzsche said God is dead, and God said Nietzsche is dead. But when Nietzsche said God is dead, he didn't mean God is dead. He says the God that was taught to us was never alive.
Bullshit. Okay, I'm gonna say a sentence, and you tell me what I mean. Here's a sentence. God is dead. Okay, now tell me what I mean. Do I mean that God is not dead? Or do I mean that God is dead? This guy is silly ignorant. That's how uninformed this man is. Silly ignorant.
Alive in the first place. We just discovered that he's dead. We discovered he was never alive. But if you were to define God as being the root of all roots,
you can define God how you like. I define God, and it wasn't accepted by Gary Milne when I defined God to him. He defined his God to me, and I didn't accept his definition. So God itself is just imaginary.
if you cut to the core of all reality, you come to a reality that is beyond the reality we are aware of.
There's a reality beyond the reality that we are aware of. That is a bullshit statement, which should be stricken from the record. Court reporter, this witness is being highly nonsensical, and he's a master of gibberish. He's a word salad maitre d' chef.
A far different definition that many people would say that is intriguing, and I would embrace a concept like that. And you may not even need the word belief, actually, when it comes to that. Because it's really a logical process of realizing that it can't be that we're God, and it can't be our parents are God, even if they felt they were, and it can't be that the parents of our parents, it can't be the cause of the cause of the cause. So you come to realize that the cause of it all must be something that's completely different reality, and then you begin to taste what God really is and the value of God. Because who needs a God anyway that's just another extension of us? What is the point then?
All gods are imaginary. Your God, Rabbi Simon Jacobson, is just in your head. Don't think, or don't try and sell us that it's anything else.
Then it's just replacing, instead of worshiping myself, I'm worshiping something else that's like me, that put me here.
Why do you need to worship? Why? What is this need to worship? Do you have an innate? Were you born with a need to worship? The fuck is that anyway? Need to worship. What are you so guilty about that you need to worship to get your mind cleansed or something?
Is to come to realize that there's a reality that's very different than we are. And it's not just that God is eternal and we are temporary, and God is immortal and we are mortal. God is a different type of reality which dictates that He's eternal, that dictates eternity and immortality. And we are a reality that dictates mortality and temporary and impermanence. Now, of course, it needs a lot more elaboration of understanding this type of reality, but the first step is to not worship yourself. Don't think you have it figured out. That's the first step in really coming to understand what God really is like. And in that sense, as I said, an atheist who says there is no God, or God does not exist, the God that you've taught me doesn't exist, may be saying the deepest truth of all. It's exactly right.
Thank you very much. I am vindicated. God does not exist. The God that you're telling me about does not exist. That's what he said. He just admitted it.
That's not the God you want. You need a different type of God, or a different definition.
Why do you need God at all? If there's different definitions and different gods, why do you need this at all? Why complicate your life? Just live your life. Enjoy yourself. Don't feel guilty about your natural human instincts. That's a ridiculous notion.
And in that sense, if you get that definition, you may discover that atheists are not atheists and agnostics are not agnostic. You know?
No, you won't.
I'll throw one more point into this. In the Talmud, there's a very strange Talmud that says that Moses, when he was up on the mountain, and God was reading with him the Bible, Torah. So in the beginning of the Torah, it says, "We shall create man in the divine image." When Moses saw the word "we," he said to God, "There's only one God. Why is there a we here?" Nasa. We suggest duality, which is going to allow people to think that there's more than one God, which is, of course, antithetical to the whole principle of God is one, which means really not only there's monotheism is one God, but one reality. So God's response was, "Harei tzalite siyite." The ones who want to make a mistake, let them make a mistake. What kind of answer is that? Why would you put a word into the Torah that allows people to interpret it in the wrong way? But there's a deeper meaning behind this. It means that God created an agnostic universe. And the Arizal, the Holy Arizal, explains it this way, that for independent reality like ours to emerge, that you and I can be sitting right now in this room and speak to each other as if we're self-contained individuals. And in our feeling, we feel like we're self-made even. Logic dictates that you had parents. Logic may dictate that God created it all. But what do you feel? You feel like you're an extension of someone else? You feel you're invulnerable and you're here. That's it, I'm here to stay. Logic tells you that it's not that way, but you're emotionally, you feel I'm here. So the Arizal explains it's a result of God having to concealing his presence. For us to be able to have an independent consciousness, independent and individual ego, God concealed his presence to allow us to have our presence. It would be as if you have a dominant leader, a dominant teacher, who completely encompasses everything. There'd be no room for anyone to emerge. So God conceals his presence, which essentially means creates an agnostic universe where those that want to make a mistake can make a mistake. That's part of the plan. Part of the plan is that it is a concealment. Go back to Christopher Hitchens. A few days before he died, or a few weeks, he was asked by a journalist, since you're such an atheist, what happens after you die, you discover there is a God? So his answer was, I'll ask him, why did he conceal himself so well? I would say a pretty good answer for an atheist, which means, if you think about it, that he accepted the concept that everyone, that maybe God...
No, but I'm going to rush to Christopher Hitchens' defense. He did not accept the concept that God does exist. The concept is the concept. It's just conceptual. But Christopher Hitchens did not ever accept the possibility that God exists. No, never, ever. Nonsense.
He actually did create this whole thing, but he concealed himself so well that you can convince yourself, or you can determine that you don't need...
That's stupid. Again, it's a stupid excuse. You don't have any evidence for God because God concealed himself. So an atheist goes to heaven and finds out that God was there all along, but he just concealed himself. That's stupid. That's absolutely... It's the word... It's dumb. Sometimes, have you ever noticed that sometimes I get lost for words, or I stumble over them, or I trip over my words? It's nothing new, folks.
There's no proof, and therefore maybe God doesn't exist. Maybe that itself God put into place. Now, of course, that throws a whole monkey wrench into this, because then that would say that actually every time we have doubts, that may be exactly what God did. And what are you going to do? If the Creator cloaked himself and shrouded himself and not allowing you to see him, or it, whatever, then what? So here the Kabbalah and Hasidic thought gives a whole eloquent explanation that though God did conceal and create an agnostic universe, but he didn't create an airtight agnostic universe. There is the ability to pierce the darkness, the black hole, the tzimtzum, and bring light. And that's why you see people make...
What is this fucking guy talking about? If you're following this, you're a champion, because I don't have a fucking clue.
Making choices where they say, you know what? I may not see God, and I may not be able to prove it.
Okay, so he definitely presupposes God no matter what. Okay, no matter what this guy says, he is presupposing God.
Absolutely. But I know that there's something there. And because I know there's something there, I commit my life to goodness and kindness, to live a divine life, not to give in to the temptation to not be accountable and not be responsible, even though that may be more comfortable, and to live even though I cannot see, but I can sense there's something beyond. And by living that way, that's how you pierce the darkness. That itself is how we bring God into the picture. And that's why the Medrash says on this verse that my holiness, God says, is dependent on yours. Because
my holiness is dependent on yours. Of course, somebody would have had to make that up and write it down. And this guy would be the kind of sucker who would come along and spread that kind of rhetoric. That doesn't make any sense at all. That is just plain stupid. This guy is a victim of ignorant thinking. Lifelong ignorant thinking.
I can't be holy unless you acknowledge me. That's the way I bound myself to this world. I've concealed myself well enough that it's you that has to bring me to the surface, and I will not do it. Because if I do it, then it loses the whole purpose of us being independent entities. So that's how Jewish thought, mystical thought, really explains the fact that this is an agnostic universe, and it's very easy for us to deny God, or even if you claim you're a believer, to live a life that isn't always consistent to your beliefs. Why? Because the beliefs are in your mind and in your emotions and heart.
Ta-da!
What dominates? The reality of this material universe. But there's a deep sense in our souls, being that this...
He's made a very huge assumption there about souls. I have never ever sensed a soul, neither in myself nor in anybody else. So what is the soul that he talks about? Well, it doesn't exist, just like he's God.
Soul originates from God, that there's something more. And for some of us, it's more than just something more. It's really coming to a journey, a journey and a search, like Abraham, to come to realize that not only that there's something more, but that more is a reality very different than our own. And that's what I want to connect to, because that's real. I want to be able to recognize and come to an experience that is real because it's real, not because it's real based on my empirical and other observations.
You hear what he said? He wants to have an experience that is real because it's real, not because of my observations and empirical evidence that I can see. Again, it's nonsense. It doesn't make sense. This guy is selling you snake oil in a huge, huge, huge jar. 2 for the price of 1.
No, we don't want a God created in the human image. We want a human created in the divine image, which is what Abraham came to discover. We want to recognize that
human created the divine image. That's exactly what happened. You know, you're flip-flopping now, Rabbi Simon.
We want to be part of the whole, not that the whole should be an extension of ourselves. And that's ultimately when we say we worship or we serve God, which is, could be a turnoff. What do you mean serve God? Why serve God? I want to serve myself. You're not serving God as a slave to a master. You're serving a reality that's higher than your own.
Oh, you said it again. A reality that's higher than your own. That's a claim that he can never prove. So I'm going to file that in the garbage pile.
And in effect, what you get in return is you become an extension of that. So we have 2 choices in life. You can be dedicated to yourself and your needs. Then great, okay, you'll achieve as much as your needs and your demands require. Or you can dedicate your life to a cause greater than yourself. And if that cause greater than yourself is eternal and immortal and real because it's real and non-existential existence, then you become an extension of that eternity and that immortality. So the interesting twist is that when you lose yourself, you surrender your ego and your sense of control of what you think matters and what you think is real, and you surrender that to something much realer than yourself, which we call God, you then begin to be an extension and experience what that higher reality is like. That's what happens. I have to share this. Years ago, when I started this class,
I don't think so. I think I've heard enough. I've had enough of this man. He's annoying me, and he's got to go.